Hello friends, quick reminder. If you like true sheriff horror with rain in the background, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Hello friends, my name is Nate Portillo. I spent 9 years with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, mostly patrol and backcountry response east of the 202, up where the subdivisions thin out and the desert stops, pretending it's tamed. If you've ever stood at First Water Trailhead in the Superstitions before dawn, you know that smell. Creosote waking up after a night breeze, dust like chalk on your tongue, a little cold running off the rock, as if the mountain itself is exhaling. That's my beat. Or it was. The call that started all of this was boring on paper. Welfare check on an overdue family. 4 hikers. Silver Nissan Rogue parked since yesterday morning. Monsoon season. Radar pulsing on my MDT. I just finished a noise complaint that came with a free shouting match on a cul-de-sac in Apache Junction, and I was thinking about coffee. It was a Sunday, late August, the kind where the sky can't decide if it wants to kill you or leave you alone. I was running solo. Our SAR posse was on standby, but stretched. A couple of volunteers were already out near Boulder Canyon looking for a separate party that hadn't checked back in. Dispatch gave me what they had: husband, wife, 2 kids. Names redacted here for obvious reasons. The wife texted a sister around 10:22 a.m. the day before, dropping into the slot, be back by dinner. The sister expected a photo spam that never came. Phone pings died around noon. The sister waited until sunrise to call. You'd be surprised how often people wait. They don't want to be dramatic. They always tell us. I didn't want to bother anybody. I rolled into First Water around 7:36. Slow up the washboard leading in, radio mic clipped to my vest, water sloshing in the cooler behind me. Gravel snapped under my tires. Overcast, everything lit flat. Thunderheads gathering the way cattle dog eyes gather, focused on some private plan. The Nissan was there all right, dusted, a clean finger swipe across the hood where somebody tested if it was theirs. The back seat had a folded stroller and a soft cooler with half-melted ice water that had refrozen itself into cloudy chunks. That told me it sat through the night and into the cool of dawn. On the dash was a paper map, one of those glossy kiosk ones a ranger prints by the box, folded, then refold to a route traced in mechanical pencil. First Water, a cut across, unmarked, washes a little side canyon I knew, but never saw anyone mark. It didn't have an official name. We called it the Slot, because sometimes the desert doesn't need poetry. I keyed up. 321 to dispatch. I'm code 6 at First Water with the overdue vehicle. Starting a hasty in 15. Copy, 321. The radio breathed back. Arrow might be delayed. Storm cells near Usuri. The mountain goes quiet in heat. But this quiet was different, the kind that makes the hairs on your arms adjust their helmet straps. No quail calls, no cicadas. Even the little clicky sound cholla spines make against each other when a breeze pushes through, gone. I told myself it was the storm front muting the world. I signed the trail log with the time and my call sign because habits keep you alive more than bravado. I loaded my pack: water, med kit, soft restraints, tarp, extra radio, spare handheld GPS, chem lights, a coil of webbing. I put a pair of nitrile gloves in my hat band to keep them dry. I mounted my body cam because I always mounted it, even when supervisors acted like backcountry meant optional. The last thing I threw in was one of those bright blue ponchos they hand out free at events, mine from a Diamondbacks game, because rain will make you do desperate-looking things to stay dry out there. A couple of hikers watched me from their Subarus with faces that said adventure, and we bought our gear at REI because the lady said it breathes. I nodded, took a long pull from a warm Gatorade, and stepped into the trail. I've walked those first 2 miles more times than I can count. The trail climbs gradual across low ridges, then suddenly you're in real country, spires and shadow cuts and boulders stacked like dinosaur vertebrae. Morning light was thin. The clouds were that green-gray that sometimes means hail. Because the family had 2 kids, I looked for the little tells. Fruit snack wrappers. Tiny heel strikes skittered sideways when little legs try to keep up. The peculiar drag pattern strollers leave when some parent insists, heroically, on getting one through a wilderness they weren't designed for. There were shoe prints, all right. Adult size, another smaller adult maybe. Two little ones, both in cheap sneakers, the tread already giving up. A dog? No, that was good. Dogs panic families into bad choices. Half a mile from the slot turnoff, the weirdness started. It wasn't dramatic. That would have been easier to dismiss. It was a wrongness in the math of the ground. Parallel lines in the dust, very faint, like something dragged lightly. Two lines exactly the same width apart, straight as if laid by a carpenter with a taut string. They ran across the trail, into brush, reappeared 15 yards later, then were gone. I crouched and put a finger on one line. The soil there was undisturbed, like a print that hadn't actually depressed the grit. If that makes no sense, I'm with you. The lines weren't in the dirt. They were in the idea of the dirt. The slot is a side cut you only find if you're looking for it. The main wash wants to seduce you with easy walking. The slot hides behind a cluster of ocotillo like a narrow mouth that forgot how to smile. There's a small cairn somebody built up years ago. It's always knocked down, always rebuilt by a different hand, always slightly wrong. At the mouth of the slot, the air shifted. Cooler, but not in the normal way where shade equals relief. This was cool like a supermarket produce aisle where atomized water is blowing microscopic dew into your face. I smelled rock, clean and old, and something like ozone. There was a crisp static to it, like if you had licked a lantern battery as a kid and your tongue remembered. I radioed. 321 entering the slot, beginning a sweep. Copy, came the disembodied reply. Then a crackle of static that feathered out in a way I'd never heard. Not a burst, not the usual skip. Like someone pinched the transmission between two fingers and smoothed it flat. The slot takes you single file. The walls climb, color-banded with mineral memory. Iron, manganese, ancient ash. I swept with the beam of my flashlight. The walls shone with tiny crystals, micromirrors that caught the light and threw it back fractured. I saw the first of the wrappers wedged in a tiny ledge above shoulder height, a grapefruit snack packet, corner torn neatly. I bagged it. I found a child's pink hair tie. Bagged. It's amazing, the faith in little rituals we build to convince ourselves we know what we're doing. 50 yards in, the slot turns a tight S. As I rounded the second curve, my beam crossed four faces at once, and my heart went full drum. They were seated in a row on a bench of stone like they were waiting for a bus. Husband, wife, boy, girl, all upright, eyes open, no blood, no visible trauma. Their hands were folded in their laps. The girl's shoe was untied, lace puddled. The boy's fingers were damp with something black that didn't look wet and didn't seem to move. It reminded me of squashed mesquite sap, but it didn't glisten. It ate the light. I said their names out loud because that's what you do, even though you know from the way the air sits on your skin that nobody in that row is coming back. I said them again, louder, because sometimes I am stubborn. I put two fingers on the wife's carotid. The skin was cold, but not the cold of a body in desert night. That has an edge to it, a stiffness. This was interior cold, like a refrigerator had been turned on inside her and then unplugged. Rigor comes and goes in the heat. I'm not new, but I didn't feel the normal story in these bodies. The husband had a faint smile, the kind people make when they realize the joke is about them and they decide to be good sports. The kids were just blank, not afraid, not peaceful. If you've ever seen somebody's face when a doctor says a word like malignant, that's close. It's an expression that is less a face and more a conversation that stopped mid-sentence. I checked my watch to mark time. It said 14:13. I looked up at the slot's gray sky and down at my watch again. 7:58 had been the last I remembered. Now everything was frozen at 14:13. I tapped the watch face like an idiot. The second hand ticked once, lazily, and rejoined its friends at the 13. I keep my radio. 321 to dispatch. Static answered. Not snarly static. Smooth, almost polite. Dispatch. I have 4D. OA. I repeat, 4D. O. A. Request SAR. M. E. Notify. Silence. Then a whispering overlay that sounded like my own words fed back at me from a hallway. DOA. Request. I backed up a step to get above the bodies, trying for a better angle at the sky and its invisible radio gods. That's when my boot heel hinged on something and almost sent me backward. It was a cobble, round, perfect, set in the floor like an eye. Somebody, no, not somebody, something had set about half a dozen of those cobbles into the rock here in an arc. The stones weren't from this canyon. They were river stones, smoothed by water that hadn't touched this slot in 100 years. I'd seen flash floods tear through here, but floods don't lay rocks into sockets like that. Floods thrash. They chew and spit. These stones were placed. My light found more embedded in the wall at shoulder height, set in 2s and 3s, paired like points on some instrument you could tune. I panned the light past the row of faces to the slot wall behind them. That was when the beam blew out in a color the mountain didn't grow. Not bright, not like maglite white, duller than that. A kind of black-blue glassiness that drinks light and returns it as bruise. The stripe ran vertical from the floor to a crack above the parents' heads. It looked wet. I could see my own light shake in it like a bad dream. And deep in that stripe, something moved laterally, like watching fish from a bridge you wish you never climbed onto. Not fish. I don't know. But I felt my mouth say don't. To myself, or to it, I couldn't tell. I edged sideways and saw the opening. It wasn't a miner's tunnel. I know those smells. Old mines stink like paper cuts and mouse piss. This was a fault seam widened by human hands a very long time ago, and then finished by something else. The edges were arrased in a way stone doesn't do by itself. The floor wore smooth not where feet would polish it, but along the sides, shoulder height, as if the carried thing touched the wall more than the carrier touched the ground. And from inside it came a draft. It moved around my cheeks with a little electric crackle. My radio hissed and gave me 3 syllables in a voice I recognized as my sergeant's. Hold. Why? And then the draft swallowed it. I know the list of officer survival sins. Going alone, going without comms, going outside the scope of your call. I also know that if we waited on perfection in the desert, nobody would come home. I set a glow stick on the stone by the family so my back trail would have a heartbeat. I marked the slot wall with a blue chemlight smear, 1 swipe, because olfactory cues don't get lost when radios do. Then I ducked into the seam. It didn't go far. 30 yards maybe. Shoulders brushed, rocks catching at my vest. My light died once, came back on its own without the hard click I'm used to. I clicked it anyway for the comfort of the noise. The floor tipped down. The draft freshened. There was that smell again. Ozone and something like wet pennies. I stepped into the room. I've been underground a lot. I've sat in lava tubes that go dead quiet and make you believe you can hear your own retinas. I've felt mine air fail and the squeeze of bad rock too eager to close. This wasn't like those. This room was wrong in a manner that felt engineered. The circle of it was too true. The pillars that rose from the floor to the ceiling weren't carved, but they were finished. Surfaced like skin on a horse's nose. Matte, soft to the touch, not moist, not dry. When my light washed across them, little particles in the surface captured it and held it a beat too long, so turning my head left a comet tail of sight across my eyes. In the center was a depression, shallow, perfectly round, filled to the rim with water that didn't reflect anything except the ceiling, which it reflected way too well. I brought the light close and the surface didn't blow out. It did the opposite. It seemed to darken, and inside the dark there were points that every instinct wanted to call stars, except the pattern was all wrong, and the wrongness made the base of my skull feel like sleep paralysis was rolling in. The walls held pictures, not petroglyphs in the way your brain expects, deer and spirals and hunt lines. These were lines of little round insets like the stones in the slot, organized into tracks that went from floor to ceiling. In some places 2 tracks converged, and the stones embedded there were not stone. They were copper. Real copper, green-bloomed, like somebody stole a length of wire and cut it into coins then pressed them into wet ash until the ash grew hard. When my light hit those coins, a tone came. I swear it. Barely audible. Felt more than heard. As the beam moved, the tone rose and fell in a way that made my teeth itch. I turned in a slow 360 because that's what training would say to do if training had been written for rooms like this. And then the light found eyes. They weren't back in a corner, because the room didn't have corners. They weren't hiding. There's no special drama to give you. Just there, fixed, 2 feet above where I expected them to be if the head behind them had been like mine. They were not a color. Or they were every color. I don't want to make it grand. They reflected like a cat's eyes when your car catches them. Retroreflective, but without the little green gold core. These returned my light as quicksilver, all direction, unfixed. They grew brighter, not as if the creature was moving closer, but as if the eyes adjusted something in themselves to manage my light at a ratio it preferred. There were more eyes beside them, and then higher, another set, like something tall had stooped to fit and then decided it didn't need to. I said sheriff's office, because voice fills a space you don't want other things to fill. If somebody's in here, I need you to. The left-hand eyes blinked. The blink wasn't a lid closing down. It was a membrane sliding sideways like water across a flat stone. Then the right-hand eyes wavered, and there wasn't a second set anymore. There was one set. It had moved without moving. My body didn't want that. It tried to step back. My heel found the round lip of the depression, and my thigh flexed hard to keep me from sitting down into whatever the not water wanted to be. A new sound layered itself across the tone. It wasn't a voice. Not at first. It was like when two radios on different frequencies get close, and their carrier waves rub. A shimmer, a stutter. Then the stutter found cadence. And then I heard words. Not English. Not Spanish. Not any of the Tejano or Apache snatches I know. But what came next was English, and I don't know if it learned it from me or if it already had it. Or if English is just what my head laid over, like a patch on a jacket, to make sense of a joke the jacket couldn't have told. Not your room, it said. Or I heard. Not your count. My light shook in my hands. The beam jittered across the pillar and cut the room into slices. The eyes did not flinch. The tone lowered. It pushed against my pulse and found its rhythm like a drummer trying to win over a crowd. My radio hissed in my chest. The mic crackled. Nate. It was my sergeant again, but thinner, like he'd spoken into a paper towel roll. Do not go deeper. Hold position. I licked my lips. Who are you? I asked the eyes. Watching. Came back, but the word arrived peeled. Watching. Keeping count. Not yours. I didn't like that it used count twice. I looked at the pictures in the wall again, the tracks of embedded stones. They ran in columns. Some columns had little gaps where a stone should go, and there wasn't one. Those gaps set my brain on fire. I knew with that same knowing that makes you look for your phone even before your hand checks your pocket that those gaps were not mistakes. They were places where a count had been removed. Borrowed. Reconciled later. Or not. I have 4 dead in the slot. I said, the way you shoehorn procedure into the part of your day that no longer carries it. I need to recover them. The eyes pulsed. The tone rose half a step. We took no breath. It said. We counted. Counted what? Seeing. It didn't move like we do. I know I keep saying that, but it matters. The space between movements felt edited, as if it wasn't crossing those inches. It was allowed to be here and then allowed to be there because the rules inside this room weren't the same as the rules outside. You can accuse me of making a metaphor out of fear, and maybe I am, but I have spent hours looking for smaller words. If you took them, I said, because pushing arguments into corners is how I've stayed a cop for almost a decade without wearing a case that ruined me. You'll give them back. Count is count, it returned. We don't take. We count what should not see. We mend. We mend the count when it breaks. By whose rule? Not yours. The tone shifted so low I felt it vein deep. My hands tingled. Sweat ran down my ribs, and I didn't feel it leave, as if the room took moisture and held it still in the air until it decided whether to keep it. Outside, thunder rolled. The room didn't care. I looked at the depression again, the not water. A few motes and it moved. Up, then sideways, then back in a pattern my eyes wanted to call orbit, but it wasn't orbit. I caught my own reflection in it finally. Not my face, exactly, but a smeared version where my forehead was too tall and my mouth a hair too small and my eyes very, very bright. The wrongness of that reflection landed in me like a command. Get the living out. Let me carry them, I said. All 4. The room pressed on my ears, the way a plane does on descent when you forgot to swallow. The eyes dimmed a fraction. Not a retreat. An assessment. 2. It said, and it did not say the number as breath. It printed it in my head in a way that came with a quantity. A container. Half. 4, I said. 2, it said again. Somewhere down the seam behind me, boots on rock. A voice I recognized as a volunteer named Kyle, high with excitement and alarm. Deputy? You in there? SARS here. Hello? My radio squawked, the paper tube voice again. Nate, respond. The eyes blinked. The room throbbed. It turned its attention the way a dog will turn its ear to a sound it's been pretending it doesn't hear. It didn't like multiple. It didn't like more than one person being inside the count. I felt that in the way a person feels whether coming in their knees. You will take two, it said, and make, not seeing. You will move the count. We will mend. You will not bring others to this room. They will not see. And if I refuse? I asked. That was bravado talking. The kind that gets a line officer remembered for something other than their kids' birthdays. I wasn't likely to be a statue in the plaza, but saying it made me feel like my spine belonged to me again. Count breaks more, it said. We mend more. I have a lot of regret. That day, agreeing isn't one of them. I've replayed alternate moves until the tape wore thin. I don't love any of what I see. If you want me to say I should have stood and shouted and dragged the whole county down there with CNN on my hip, I can't. You weren't in that room. Neither was I, not by the rules towns are built on. Two, I said. Then, because I know how to buy a little face saving in a negotiation even when the other party's face is a concept, I added, I choose which. It held me in a silence that was not a silence. The tone was there. The bright, unfixed eyes. The water that was not water that reflected a ceiling that could not be this ceiling. The copper coins singing as my breath pushed their note. And then that head tilt. It's an old primate motion, and seeing it come from a not-me-shaped thing almost made me run. The eyes did that pour of brightness again, like they were changing aperture. Choose, counter, it said. I turned and stumbled back through the seam. The slot felt full of air for a second, and then lighter, like the room had been behaving as a lung for the whole canyon. SAR lights strobed white-blue off the walls. Two volunteers were halfway in, Kyle and a woman named Sabrina. Helmets, ropes coiled, faces washed pale as if their mothers had told them they were late for dinner. Behind them, the slot mouth was a ribbon of gray sky. A raindrop ticked, and then another. The storm had finally decided. 4 DOAs, I said, loud enough that my body believed it would hit my sergeant's ears through my mic. We need to start packaging. Radio's trash out here, Kyle said, cupping his earpiece and cocking his head. We kept hearing you then. He did something with his hand that tried to describe the thinness I'd heard in the paper towel voices. Sabrina tucked hair behind her ear, eyes on the family. It's what happened to them. Heat. Their skin. Is it cold in here to you? I nodded. We'll get them out, I said, and it was half a prayer. I picked the kids. I know how that looks typed. I still see their faces more nights than I sleep. I thought maybe the two smallest would be easiest to package, simpler to move up the slot. Out fast before the storm made everything a grease chute. That's the officer I was, practical, moving pieces. But if I'm honest, there was something else, a pressure from the room that thawed in containers. It had offered me too, and it had printed a shape in my mind that fit the two small bodies better than two big ones. I hate admitting that. I hate that I felt it. We worked fast. I had body bags in my pack because I'd argued for body bags and backcountry packs after the Barnhart Mesa thing in 2019 where 2 hikers fell and we had to decide whether to burrito them in their own clothes. SAR hates hauling full bag weight through a slot, but they'll make it happen if you sound like you'll quit if they don't. Sabrina took the girl. Kyle and I took the boy. We slid them carefully onto soft litters, hooked loop runners, and started the painful ballet of moving fragile cargo through a canyon that wants to turn you into ground meat. The minute the bags lifted, the canyon's temperature changed. A warm breath leaked back into it. Cicadas started up in the distance like a sound file unmuted. A single raven croaked up in the cut, its voice echoing and landing weirdly between us. The glow stick pulsed at our feet where I'd left it, bright blue against rock the color of bone. Behind me, the seam breathed once, deeper than any day should breathe, and then went still with the finality of a solved equation. We made it 60 yards before the rain hit. Hard. Desert rain doesn't have a nice-to-meet-you stage. It cleans your teeth for you without asking. We wedged ourselves into a wider section and braced the litters so a surge wouldn't turn them into boats. Radio traffic came back in fitful shreds. I heard my call sign, my sergeant's tone, the busy hum when multiple units stomp each other in a panic, a chime that wasn't ours. Sabrina tried the sat phone. It went dead like someone had closed a hand around its idea. Then the rain eased, as Arizona rain will do, bored of its own drama. It took the better part of 2 hours to move the kids out. By the time we reached the mouth, patrol units had stacked down the trailhead, and a couple of guys from the medical examiner's office in their blue gloves were pretending they weren't cold. I told my sergeant we had 2 more inside. He looked at the sky, at the slot, at me, and at the line of green-black cells marching across the east like cavalry. He called it. "We're not sending anyone back in until the footings rock," he said. "We barricade. We sit on it. We go in at first light." He didn't ask why the kids first. He didn't need to. We've all triaged choices we later carried like bones in a pack. That night the storm did what storms do to that country. Sobbed themselves apart. Gutters and washes vomiting brown water. The mountain shrugging and rolling fresh rock into places that had been passable that morning. I slept in my unit in the trailhead lot. Hood up. Rain ticking a lullaby. I dreamed of copper coins singing and of water that knew my face, but not me. At dawn, barricade tape took on that yellow no color it gets when sun is an opinion and not a fact. The slot had scoured. The floor was rearranged with the same insignificance children bring to chess. We went in with M.E., 2 more SARS, and a commander whose pasted smile said he was ready to look through me to get to the facts that would keep us in front of the news cycle. The bench where the family had been sitting was empty. There were drag marks. The good kind. The kind you can photograph and say, "See, here's where a professional removed what did not belong." There were also the other lines, the perfect parallel ones that weren't in the dirt so much as the thought of the dirt. They ran across the slot, into the seam I had used, and then they weren't there. My body cam footage cut to snow for 3 minutes and 41 seconds right as I stepped into the room. Then it came back on me standing with the seam behind me, panting lightly, light on my vest bobbing. If you think I didn't scrub that SD card forensically for those minutes, bless your faith. The report we wrote said, 2 decedents recovered, 2 not located, presumed deceased, unrecoverable due to flash flooding and terrain movement. We listed factors: heat, dehydration, disorientation, sudden onset storm. We did the sacred bureaucratic dance of making tragedy look palatable. The sister cried. The grandfather did not. Their pastor said the right words in a cadence that put the mountain's air back in my lungs for 5 minutes. I took their little shoes home and put them inside a shoebox and then took them back because I realized I had done a thing I'd arrest a person for, holding evidence because I didn't want it to feel like evidence. Property logged them. The clerk thought I was crying because the air conditioning in that office is always set for penguins who own fleece vests. 2 days later, a DM arrived in the throwaway Reddit account I used to find missing person rumors before the tips line gets clogged with dreamers. The username was Desert Refugee 2003. The message was 4 sentences. "You did right taking the small. The room hates multiples. I saw the eyes in '03 near the Dutchman petroglyphs and lost time. We took 1 back and 2 stayed calm in the rock until the count was mended. Do not bring more than you have to. They move when you don't look." I didn't reply. The account deleted itself an hour later. I told myself it was somebody who had overheard something at the trailhead and was playing games. Then I dreamed again of that room, of copper coins pressed into ash, of my light moving like a bow across a string and pulling a note out of the wall. The grandfather had insisted on a second search. We humored it because grief makes men important in ways their bodies must honor. We found nothing on the second day but a coin with a square nail driven through it where nobody would ever put a coin, on a shelf 2 feet higher than a tall man's reach. It was copper, green the way pennies green when they live by the sea. I touched it. My finger tingled. Sabrina said, "Don't," and I laughed because the words sounded like the one I'd said to the stripe of black blue in the slot. Don't. The brain is a turntable. It plays what you put on it, whether it's music or a recording of a man saying he's fine when he isn't. I tried FOIA for the Elio call audio because that's how you trap a memory in the shape of a fact. The county sent me a CD that was blank except for a hiss that, if you turned it up enough, had the ghost of 3 syllables. Hold. Why? And then a tone that made my dog leave the room. The letter with its cited exemptions, security of critical infrastructure, and undue burden. We love those phrases when we wear them. We hate them when we need a truth, and the truth declines to wear pants. The last thing I'll tell you plainly is the part 1 haven't told anyone at all. A year later, with monsoon smell rising out of concrete and kids stomping puddles in a Safeway lot, I got a little envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a map like the one on the Nissan's dash. It had a route carved across it in that mechanical pencil way. Unemotional, precise, a little arrogant. The route led not into the slot we had used, but to a different mouth 2 miles away, a place where the rock folds itself over like a giant closed fist. Under the route, pencil wrote, 2 more. I didn't bring anyone. I know what that sounds like. That's the point. I drove out after shift with a thermos of coffee that I didn't drink and the Diamondbacks poncho that had molded into the shape of my back. I walked in under a sky that was bright with heat lightning, silent, sheet flashes like a god taking photographs of a party he didn't want to attend. I went alone. My radio stayed at the trailhead because the room, if the rooms in those mountains are not one room with many mouths, doesn't like multiples of anything independent. I stepped into rock and the air turned into a theory of itself, and I breathed and said 2 names out loud, their names, like prayer or like trespass, and I asked the count to be mended in the direction I needed it to be mended. And here's where I don't know how to tell you something that sounds sane and ask you to keep listening. The eyes didn't come. The tone did. It swelled out of the walls the way day swells out of birdsong before birds seem to agree to make it. The depression was not in the middle this time. The coins in the wall were not copper. They were iron, dark, rust that didn't flake. When I moved my light across them, the note they made was lower, like a bass string tuned down for a blues song. The not water reflected ceiling again. Only this time when I looked up to see what the not water thought the ceiling should be, there was nothing for it to copy, and it copied the nothing with such care that I wanted to praise it like a child who has drawn a perfect circle freehand. I said their names again. The room said the number. Not with words, with a making. I felt 2 become possible in my chest, as if my ribs were a lock someone had filed a new key for. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to stop wanting to throw up and then throw up. I set 2 bright blue ponchos on the floor because I couldn't think of any other offering the room might understand, because guilt has no rituals that work in rooms like this. And then I waited. You've never waited until rock notices you. You think you have, but you haven't. I thought the army had taught me patience. The desert had taught me patience. My ex-wife had taught me patience. But the time that lap of rock placed over me was not patience. It was erasure. You don't count minutes there. You count the times your pulse tries to flinch under somebody else's baton. My knees ached. The note ran up and down my teeth. A rivulet of water that was not water tracked itself across the floor and sketched a shape around the ponchos that looked like 2 bodies lying down until it didn't. Then, no drama, it was over. The tone left, not like a door slammed, but like a polite guest who keeps saying they should go and then goes. The ceiling came back to being a ceiling. The coins were dull. The water was water, or the idea of water was the idea of water. At dawn, when the mountain pretends it is tender again, I walked out. The trail had 3 sets of prints that were not mine. 2 small, 1 adult. The adult stride was off by 1/3 of a foot, like one leg had remembered something the other hadn't. I followed them until they split. The adults went left into a wash, and then were gone in the way things are gone when it's their business to be gone. The kids' prints, if they were those kids' prints. This is where narrative wants to be your friend, and it is not. Went straight down the board, honest trail toward the trailhead. I never saw the bodies again. I do not know what got mended, or where the count stopped, or if it will. I wrote this down because I don't sleep right, and because words are the last tool I have that doesn't need batteries. If you want to say it was heat illness, say it. If you want to point to that black-blue stripe and call it manganese staining where groundwater moved through, point. We make ourselves feel better with names. I wear a name on my chest every shift, and it hasn't saved me from what a room in a mountain knows. When I bring new deputies out there now, I tell them the official things. Log your trailhead, carry more water than you think you need, trust your watch over your gut when the sun lies. Know that you are not tough, only stubborn. Then I tell them the thing that makes them laugh, because laughter is how we set a chair in a room that would rather we stand. If you ever find yourself on the wrong side of a superstition slot, and you feel like you've stepped into a place that counts instead of watches, don't bring your whole heart. Keep a piece of it outside with your truck. Because if the room decides to take inventory and you've brought your whole heart, it's going to find something to mend you weren't planning on. People vanish in those mountains. We make flyers and candle vigils and little Facebook storms because that is what the living do to keep not dying. I'm writing this for them too. For the ones who sat politely on a stone bench while something that wasn't a storm fixed arithmetic that is older than our roads. For the ones who go under and come out walking with a stride that's off by 1/3 of a foot. For For the ones who walk out with nothing said and account moved. I see you on the trail sometimes. Faces set softly like you've negotiated your own existence down to a price you can't afford and pay anyway. If you ever hear a tone in stone that seems to go up when you move your light, leave. If the air gets cold without getting kind, leave. If you see coins pressed into ash where there shouldn't be coins or ash, leave. If a room offers you a number, take it or run, but don't argue long. Rooms like that don't like patience. They like mending. I've been told to take some time off. I might. The sergeant says I seem tired in a way that sleep won't fix, and he is not wrong. The mountains will still be there when slash if I come back. They don't need any one of us. They prefer that we need them. Rain is hitting my roof right now. That soft Arizona kind that sounds like a movie sound designer is patting it with brushes. Somewhere a kid is stomping a puddle. Somewhere an old man is folding a map along a route his pencil drew when he thought he was in charge of his own paper. Somewhere a room is doing math. If you ever find yourself on that road east out of Phoenix when the clouds stack high and the rock looks like it's leaning in to smell your engine and the mountain opens a mouth that was not there yesterday, keep driving. If you hike anyway, because who am I to tell you not to go where I go? Log your trailhead, text your sister, and when you see stones set in pairs in the wall like points on an instrument, turn around. There are things in this county I can protect you from. There are things I can arrest and cage and send to a judge whose good days outnumber his bad. And then there are rooms that keep their own books and balance them at intervals we don't get to see. Those do not ask permission. They ask count. And sometimes, even if you beg, they will only let you take two. Hey Solabis, my name is Caleb Romero. I'm 37, third generation in the county, and for the last decade, I've worn a Yavapai County badge on the Red Rock side of things, Sedona, village of Oak Creek, out past Dry Creek Road where the asphalt ends and the trailheads begin to make you feel small. I work nights more than daylight because that's when the hikers turn into overdue parties and the tourists find out maps lie. I grew up here. My mother ran a little cafe off 89A before a resort bought the block. My dad was a lineman who taught me how to smell rain and dust and how to be polite to people who have already decided you are wrong. I like the quiet parts of the job. Pulling into a dark trailhead at 2:10, stepping out into juniper smell and wet stone, hearing nothing but my own boots and the river's distant argument with itself. Nights used to feed me. Now they are something I walk through like a person walks through a room he doesn't believe is empty anymore. This story starts on October 15th. The date matters. If you've lived here long enough, you start to develop a private calendar layered over the one the government prints. We've got the balloon festival and the tourists' leaf-peeping rush, and we've got the days locals use different roads because of traffic. And then there are the dates you don't write down, that you pass along with the same tone you'd use to talk a kid away from a dog with a stiff tail. October 15th is one of those for me. It wasn't always. It is now. Dispatch put the call out at 1847. Overdue hikers, 2 adults, out-of-state plates on a rental SUV, last text at 1509 from the Devil's Bridge Trail spur. We'll be back by sunset. View is crazy. The exclamation mark landed like a threat. It was a Monday that year, shoulder season. Daytime was a soft 72 degrees. And then a gray lid slid over Sedona and turned everything echoey. Rain was fidgeting over Mingus and flicking east. The tourists love Devil's Bridge because it makes them feel brave in photographs. The sandstone arch looks like a movie set, crisp and delicate, but it's bigger than your brain admits until you stand on it. And the drop is a lot higher than Instagram lets on. The last quarter-mile climbs steep and turns the lanes into left/right stairs cut by boots. People with bad shoes and good intentions get themselves into body positions they can't get back out of. We do a dozen stuck-on-the-ledge handholds every season. It's not even a rescue. It's a coaching problem. Turn around. But first, good. Now your left foot. No, the other left. I rolled out of the substation with a thermos of coffee that lived more in my imagination than in the cup, a pack in the trunk with the usual: water, med kit, rain shell, spare radio battery, a handful of glow sticks, one of those cheap aluminum whistles I tell rookies to carry not for bears but for people. I hit 89A and then Dry Creek Road. Felt my tires hum where the pavement had been patched after summer flash floods punched it in the mouth. By the time I crossed the dirt lot for the trailhead spillover, the sky had that balled up wool look, dark from above, but still bright from somewhere you couldn't see. I killed my headlights and sat for a minute, letting my eyes go night soft. The lot was half full. Rental SUVs look like they know they don't belong, even when they're the same make and model as your neighbors. The one dispatch flagged was hard to miss. A Denver Broncos air freshener hung from the rear view, a crumpled grocery sack full of Sedona souvenir stickers in the back. The paperwork in the glove box. Don't ask how many glove boxes I've peeked into in the name of contact next of kin. Said the names were Connor and Paige. Mid-30s. Flight into Phoenix that morning. I felt a little anger about people who fly in and try to be locals for 6 hours. It's petty, but it keeps in my bones. Anger is just worry with armor on. I signed the trail register with the time and my call sign out of habit. A Forest Service ranger named Lee met me at the kiosk, a headlamp tied on her helmet, the strap cutting her curly hair into polite chaos. She knows those trails like a coyote knows stop signs. So was spinning up. Volunteers were rolling from Cornville and Cottonwood. While we waited, we walked a fast, hasty up the first mile, because time is the only thing you can borrow from the future and not pay back at the interest rate the world would prefer. I like the desert's normal noises. They give you a metronome you can match your breathing to. That night, the noise was wrong. Not quiet wrong, not storm coming wrong. It felt synchronized in a way that crept under my shirt. When the wind riffled through manzanita leaves, it did it in one rush, all at once, like someone hit play on a single-track recording of wind. When a raven called, 3 answered, but in the same beat, the way you'd clap along to a song if you were trying too hard. I didn't say anything because I like my colleagues to think I am normal. Connor and Paige, Lee said, checking the tip again on her phone. Instagram story stopped at 3:12 p.m. Last one is a boomerang of her doing that leap pose on the arch. She tagged the spot. Helpful for once. We found their footprints in the powder of the trail, new sneaker treads with the kind of pattern designers make when they've never stepped in mud, one set larger, one smaller, both shallow because dry. We also found the other kind of tracks, the ones that don't want to be tracks. The desert's full of lines that look like lines only because your brain needs patterns. But I've been working SAR long enough to know when something has weight and when something just has shadow. These parallel marks cut across the trail at a clean right angle, spaced exactly the same distance apart the entire time. Shallow. So shallow I had to take my headlamp off my helmet and hold it low to put the relief where my eyes could interpret it. They looked like the faintest of drags, like a dowel lay in the sand, and somebody lifted it without scuffing. They slid into the juniper and then were gone, the way a rattlesnake's tail vanishes into your idea of where a hole should be, but isn't. I looked at Lee and didn't have to say anything, because she's been out here long enough too. A mile in, the rain freshened the dirt so that every step we took wrote a story the mountain could read. We saw where Connor and Paige had stopped and kissed for a selfie. 2 footprints turned toward each other, his toe a little over hers as he leaned in. You learn to see tenderness as a geometric arrangement, the way people stand when their bodies believe they have time. We passed a family headed back toward the lot, a dad carrying a toddler who was pure torso heat and limp limbs, the mom asking if the bridge was much farther because his little legs tapped out. I gave them the non-committal ranger nod, friendly, unthreatening, a lie with the shape of reassurance. I didn't ask the dad if he had seen 2 30-somethings in aggressive athleisure, because people will always say yes, always. The brain wants to help so badly, it generates memory out of well-meaning static. The spur trail for Devil's Bridge peels off like an honest mistake. The signage is better than it used to be, but when the light goes, the rock takes over and makes its own rules. We reached the base of the ascent, those notched steps where people post up to catch their breath and ask strangers if they'll take their picture. There was nobody there. That's normal after dark, but it felt like the kind of normal you become suspicious of when your dog gets quiet. The rain had stopped teasing and committed. Drops found the back of my neck and slid under the collar of my shirt with that cold intimacy only rain and enemies manage. Above us, a light blinked. 2 blinks, then a pause. Headlamp. The cadence was wrong. Not the usual, hey, here we are, aimless tangle tourists do when they wave at the valley. This was the kind you do when you're trying to send language with a flashlight and you don't remember Morse, but you remember that Morse exists. I cupped my hands. Yavapai County Sheriff's Office. I called. Hold your position. There was a pause. Then the light blinked 3 times in an even rhythm. Blink, blink, blink. I turned to Lee, and we had that compressed conversation professionals have with eyebrows and silence. You ready? I'm ready. You first? Me first. Fine. We started up. Those steps are honest about what gravity wants. My thighs burned by the 3rd switchback. The rain made the sandstone feel like clay under thin skin. On the last rise, just before the arch, I smelled something like hot coins. You don't smell metal, not really. You smell whatever the metal has on it. This was copper and dust, and that ozone bite people describe when they've never actually been close to lightning. My scalp prickled in a way that had nothing to do with hair moving. We stepped out onto the flat before the arch. If you haven't been there at night, I don't know how to build it in your head for you. The sky was dark, but not, because Sedona throws its hotel glow up and the clouds send it back down like a polite neighbor. The arch itself stood out blacker than the dark around it, a cutout that your depth perception fought with. On the far side of the arch were 4 shapes, 2 tall, 2 shorter, standing very still. 2 had headlamps set to low, which made their faces both bright and unreadable. I saw the line of the arch in my peripheral vision, and my stomach did that tilt-a-room scream it does when you're at the edge of something your species evolved to avoid. Connor? Paige. I called, hand up flat in the universal stay put. The headlamps turned toward me. The cones traced across the rain, found my badge, my face, and then stopped a foot to the left of my eyes. Not grazing me. A deliberate almost. The other 2 shapes didn't turn. They stood with their bodies angled slightly away from the drop, heads cocked as if listening to something in the rock. The hair on my arms went CAP lock. The wind went from a restless hiss to that synchronized push again, a one-take exhale across manzanita leaves. I took a step forward. Lee's hand found my elbow once. Our agreed signal that we were now doing something with a plan instead of with impulse. She stayed a half step behind my right shoulder. In her other hand, her radio was high on her chest. It buzzed without voicing, as if someone was speaking into a pillow. Connor. I tried again. One of the tall shapes raised a hand. The movement was fractionally late, the way a Zoom call lags when somebody's internet isn't what their cable package promised. We're okay, a man's voice said. But the words came not from him, exactly. They were near him, like the arch itself had replayed them a second after his mouth moved. His tone was wrong in a way that's hard to explain to people who haven't sat through enough domestics at 3 a.m. He sounded like he was reading, "We're okay," off a card because that's what the card said should be said in this situation. The other tall shape, I assumed Paige, lifted her chin like she was about to talk, and then did not. The 2 shorter figures, one barely taller than the other, like 13 and 9 maybe, touched hands. They weren't kids. They were thin in that way night makes silhouettes thin. Faces turned toward the arch, toward the drop, toward the emptiest possible part of the evening. You're not supposed to be up here after dark, Lee said, because rangers have a tone they put on like their uniforms, and sometimes it works where other things fail. It makes people fall back into the order that keeps them alive. The male shape laughed, and then stopped. The laugh didn't echo. It failed to echo on a ledge that throws your smallest cough into a canyon chorus. Every part of me locked onto that fact like a dog zeros on a squirrel. We took a while, he said. Bridge was busy. We're fine. The headlamp turned again toward me, then slid off my face deliberately and landed on the space between my shoulder and my ear. My brain decided that was ruder than a finger in the chest. Can you step back from the edge? I said. All of you. 3 big steps. The man and the woman did the steps in perfect sync. Not perfect like we practice yoga together. Perfect like somebody pressed Ctrl+C/Ctrl+V on a body moving. The 2 smaller figures didn't move. Their heads angled a degree more toward the drop, and I saw the silver in their eyes for the first time. Not a color in the normal sense, not reflection from my light or theirs, not animal tapetum either. It was a return, the way license plates shine at you from a headlight beam that isn't yours. Their faces were blank. Not numb, not scared. The kind of blank that makes you think of placeholders in a manual. Lee's fingers pressed my elbow again. It meant, this is not hikerdom. This is other. I swallowed. Kids, I said gently, you need to back up. They didn't. The wind pressed once over us in that synchronized sigh. My radio crackled. Did the open mic squeal as if 2 units keyed at once? then coughed out 3 syllables in dispatch's voice. Teen, bridge, hold. I pressed the mic to my lapel. County 322 to dispatch. I have contact with the overdue along the arch. For on scene. Send SAR to my coordinates. Stand by. What came back was a smooth static, like silk being torn slowly. I looked down at my watch to push my brain into a known task, and the second hand did a little, tight tremor and then settled. 1922. The watch is one of those unfancy field watches with a face you can read when you're tired. It does not pretend to do more than be honest with you about the time. It held 1922 like it had just been told a secret and was deciding whether to keep it. I tapped it. The second hand twitched, then consented to tick again as if my authority mattered. The little shiver moving up my back kept going anyway. Let's step back, the man said brightly, like a host at a theme park ride. Everybody back, please. He and the woman moved exactly 3 steps, same stride, same footfalls, same hip angle, a cheap television's motion smoothing effect made out of people. The 2 smaller figures didn't move. That close, with my lights softened and low to keep them from turning into deer and bolting where there was nowhere to bolt except down, I saw the eyes again. Not glowing, not luminescent. Returning. The returns were layered, like retroreflective tape under a film of something clear. If you've ever looked at the back of a cat's eye in your headlights and wished you hadn't because something in your hindbrain peels off a tiny strip of sanity and sets it down like a bookmark, you'll understand. The smaller figure's pupils were wide, too wide for the light. That's when I knew they weren't kids. They were shorter, yes, but not kids. The raw length of the bones inside those silhouettes wasn't juvenile. Who are they? I asked. The man's smile tried to remember how to decide what a smile should look like. Friends, he said too quickly. Paige's head turned in the identical lag, to the identical angle. I hate when the human body does math. Lee took 2 measured steps so she had a clean angle on the group's left flank and whispered without moving her mouth. You smelling that? Metal, I said. Static, she said. We stood like that for an obvious second too long. Time pretended to be normal while we all negotiated a thing none of us knew how to say out loud. And then the smaller of the 2 not kids lifted its right hand with a jerk that had no grace in it. The motion cut clean through all the damp and the cave crowd quiet. The hand pointed down into the void, not as if showing you a bird or a view you might have missed, but as if instructing gravity where to put things. My stomach shifted in my body in a way you feel when an elevator drops that first half inch. The bigger of the 2 not kids moved its head. Not left, not right, down. Then, like a metronome finding another tempo, it moved it again. The touch of my hand on my holster found sweat in my palm that had nothing to do with rain. We're going, I said in cop calm. It's the tone you use for drunks and toddlers and arrogant men with too much weekend in them. Now, everybody, you, sir, Connor, step back 3 more steps. Ma'am, Paige, 3 more. You 2, turn around and step toward my light. The man and the woman looked at each other the way actors look at each other when they've forgotten their next line and are waiting on the prompter. Then Paige's mouth opened and I heard it. The voice that wasn't a voice. It was around the edge of her words, like a burnished halo you didn't want to acknowledge. It's okay, she said. We're okay. She whispered the last, okay, with her mouth closed. The smaller figure's head turned toward me, and then toward Lee, and then toward my radio, and then toward nothing any of us were occupying. The silver in its eyes increased like a dimmer sliding up. It took 1 small, exact step toward the void. The larger, smaller one took the same step, same time. Their shoes made a sound on the wet sandstone that made my teeth go small. I moved without talking about it first. I went low because that's what you do when you are trying to reduce the number of bodies that might tumble. I kept my center of gravity where it belongs if you want to live. My hands came up not to grab but to touch wrists and guide the movement away from down and toward beside. When I touched the smaller figure's wrist, my skin met something that did not feel like skin. It was cool, and not surface cool like rain. Cool like a room no thermostat set. The flesh had give, but less than flesh should have. More like muscle wrapped in a layer that remembered something it didn't want you to. Under my fingers, not heartbeat. Pulses, plural, much smaller, much faster, layered like 2 or 3 machines humming almost in harmony. My mouth did a thing cops' mouths do when they're working around screaming. It said, "You're all right," with built-in authority like seatbelt and hands where I can see them. The smaller figure let me angle that wrist half an inch. I felt permission, not compliance. The larger, smaller one flowed that same half inch with the same delay as the tall pair had done. When I brought my other hand up to support the elbow, don't imagine any hero nonsense. It was a tiny piece of body geometry I learned on a Friday night outside a Cheap Trick cover band. The smaller figure's head pivoted to look at my hand as if it were a bug. The silver in the eyes moved like a fluid in a container. "Back," Lee said quietly, voice properly tight. "We're off the arch in 5. Back." The man, Connor, smiled the too bright smile and took 3 more steps. The woman with him. Same time, same angle. He was helping us while also not helping at all. It was the kind of letting you see in abusers who want the police to compliment their neat lawn. And then my radio said one word clearly, a word I didn't expect and shouldn't have believed in. And the word loaded everything with a new weight. Harvest. I froze half a second. Dispatch never says that. Radios don't say that. The only time I've heard that word on official air is when a deputy found a grow and suddenly got biblical about it. But it was my dispatcher's voice, brisk and unattached, saying, "Copy on the harvest, stand by," and then the open mic squeal obliterated the rest. I wanted to throw the radio into the gulf between us and everything else. Lee heard it too. Her mouth flattened in a line I'd seen once before when she'd set her boots next to a set of child boots half full of pea gravel and knew exactly how the next hour would go. "Back," she said again, more iron now, not asking. That was when the 2 smaller figures stopped pretending to be confused hikers. They let us back them up 4 steps with no friction and then moved in concert. Not toward us, but around us. A half circle that placed them between us and the exit to the safe side of the ledge. It wasn't a trap, exactly. If I had felt threatened in the way police training defines it, we would have done something ugly right then and then lived with the paperwork forever. It was worse because it was orderly. They looked at us with those not glow-bright returns and did something with their heads that was not a nod. It was a tilt to the exact angle you need to look past a person's ear to the empty air. That was the first time I felt the other thing there with us. The shape of a group larger than these 4, down in the amphitheater dark, standing perfectly still. I couldn't see them in the direct sense. I felt them the way a herd animal feels a fence. "Enough," I said to the air. "Enough," the man repeated, with the delay, without the echo. His breath made steam that rose in one sheet and then vanished. The smaller one, the not kid with the cooler skin, blinked. Not a lid down. Something moved sideways across the eye, a clear membrane with the texture of liquid if liquid could make rules. The silver brightened. The larger, smaller one matched it exactly. They were calibrating to our lights. No, not calibrating. Deciding. The decision passed across them like the breath of a person gets ready to speak and then doesn't. I have a handful of rules I made up for myself after this night. I tell rookies 2 of them so they think I'm wise. Here's the one I don't say aloud. If something on a cliff blinks with a sideways membrane, do not negotiate with it in the plural. The plural is a promise you can't make. "Lee," I said softly, not taking my eyes off the eyes. "You see them?" She was quiet a beat longer than she should have been, which told me what I needed. "They're below the lip," she answered. "Below the arch, plenty of them." "How many?" "Don't count," she said, and it wasn't panic. It was a tone I'll hear over whatever plays at my death. Not tonight. The 2 smaller figures stepped back to the edge until their heels half hung, and then not hung, and then were exactly on the line only people who plan their steps use. The man and the woman watched, faces open and empty of human mess. Paige's lips moved, and I heard a sound at the exact frequency of words, but with none of the content. If you've ever listened to a badly tuned radio behind a closed door, you'll know the sick thrill of it. Your brain thinks language is coming and keeps waiting. "Back," I said again, and my voice cracked a little. The smaller one turned its head toward me, and I saw something there I wish I hadn't. Recognition. Not recognition as in I know you. Recognition as in I will remember you in a way that makes your name heavier. We moved. We did the dumb, brave, necessary thing and got physical. Lee pivoted left to block that flank, and I dropped to a knee and slid with my weight under the smaller one's center of gravity. I went for the inside wrist and the outside elbow because that triangulates a human nicely. It puts their physics where your leverage is. When I touched that elbow, my fingers sank into a give that wasn't tendon. It was like pushing into a bag full of thin sticks and jelly. The elbow consented to hinge. The wrist let me guide it. The body took a step toward the safe side because I had asked, and the larger, smaller one matched it with the exact delay. On the fourth step, something below us moved, the way a school of fish moves when their one mind changes its mind. The wind pressed once. The return in the eyes spiked. Now, I started, and then the man's bright voice cut clean through with stop, and everything stopped. Not my heart, the arch, the rain, the ravens, the little family 2 switchbacks down whose kid had finally decided to be awake and begin fussing. It stopped. Time took a breath and then exposed its teeth. I saw it. I'll say this once, and then if you want to turn me into the kind of person your uncle warns you not to listen to, that's on you. I saw the knot water that lives under the veins of this place. I saw the stone pull thin across a topography that was not geology. I saw the 4 nearest things to me become part of a larger shape that had nothing to do with arches and everything to do with how a count is kept. The smaller one's eyes went from silver to a chrome white my light couldn't blow out. The larger, smaller one's breath stuttered into a rhythmic triple. The man and the woman smiled their programmed smiles and stepped backward and backward and backward without falling, because falling wasn't part of the count. Don't. Lee said it absolutely the same time I said it, and the word fell off the ledge and came back as if the canyon had a mouth. The smaller one tilted its head and the membrane slid across its eye again, and I made a decision that was not brave and not good and not something I forgive myself for. I let go. I let go of that wrist. I let go of that elbow. I let go because the only way any of us left that ledge without becoming part of that synchronized thing was if we showed it we knew its rules. The larger, smaller one took one more step. The smaller one matched it. The man and the woman turned precisely 70 degrees toward the void. The 4 of them were now oriented like points on an instrument. And then the group we couldn't see below us, the larger animal whose skin we were walking on, accepted them. There was no jump, no slip, no sound of feet losing purchase. There was only the absence of them where they had been, and a feeling like an intake of breath that finished. My stomach did every elevator trick it knew. The arch under my boots came back to being a big piece of rock instead of anything else. The rain remembered to be rain. The ravens called. A kid's crying 2 switchbacks down started again as if someone hit on pause. Back, Lee said through teeth. Now. She didn't have to say it twice. We backed away from the edge on our own metronome, human, bad at it, stumbling once and hating ourselves for the stumble. At the flat below the climb, we stopped and let our bodies learn themselves again. Sir came up the trail a quarter hour later, lights in a competent line, voices that didn't know which tone to use. We showed them the place people become missing. We gave them words that did not fit. We told the truth that wasn't. We looked at each other and did not write down what we had really seen. The report the next morning said, 2 adults rescued without incident. The part where we checked the lot and found the rental SUV's trunk now contained 2 pairs of children's shoes soaked but unscuffed did not make it into a report. The part where my radio captured 3 syllables of dispatch saying, "Copy harvest," did not make it into anything that left my desk. The part where Lee and I stood in the break room with vending machine coffee and tried not to baffle each other with our words, that part is only here. I went home and slept for 2 hours and then got up and began to read. This is what I do when the world gets bigger than my job description. I make a file, the way I've seen detectives make files when a thing refuses to be solved in one sitting. I pulled missing person reports for October 15th going back to the year I got sworn, then farther. 2020, none. Pandemic year. Trails were closed for a while. The count didn't get to balance. 2015, 2 trail runners vanished between the arch and the Mescal Spur, never found, searched under 5 different ICS branches and 3 news cycles. 2010, 1 elderly man last seen at the base, shoes found neatly side by side. The note in the case file says, possibly wandered off, which is the theater we do when we want to stop typing. 2005, a German tourist, abrupt fog rolled in according to a cousin's statement, which doesn't happen here like that, not in October. 2000, my sophomore year, Dad telling me in the kitchen not to go play around Dry Creek after dark for a couple weeks because the hippies up there do weird stuff on the equinox, which is wrong because the equinox is in September. 1995, a single line in a ledger. Hiker presumed lost at night. Patterns make you crazy if you let them. They also save you. Every 5 years on the 15, except when the 15 is interrupted by something bigger than Sedona. Not numerology, not moonface, not ritual in the human sense. A cycle, a rhythm. The bridges in this country, geology's jokes, do more than sit pretty for strangers' cameras. They know math in a way we do not. I posted a question in a private forum essay our folks used to swap practical lies. Gear weights, nasty patient stories, YouTube videos of rescues that make us say don't do that. I used my throwaway and asked, anyone else working Sedona see things on October 15th? Retroreflector eyes? Synchronized movement? Radio oddities? The post got 3 replies before it got silently removed by a moderator with a username I suspect is a park superintendent. The first reply just said, do not count. The second said, we call them hollow because the eyes shine like reflectors and the rest is just a shell. The third was a DM. Whatever you think you can save, have it. They take the rest. Don't bring a group. They don't like multiples. I went to the library because the internet has taught me that sometimes the paper remembers what the screen refuses to. The librarian I know, Margie, gave me that look old people give cops when they remember changing our diapers. I pulled microfiche for the year 2000 and the year 1995 because I like starting where I was alive and working back. There was a tiny thing in the 2000 Sedona Red Rock News. Night hikers cautioned. Devil's Bridge not recommended after sunset. The line that made me feel sick was the sentence that read like a shrug. Forest Service reminds that several hikers have been lost to darkness there over the years. Lost to darkness is the sort of poetry officials use when they sense that people want mystery and will not be fed with rocks sliding and wet shoes. A letter to the editor 5 days later from someone calling themselves Concerned in West Sedona said, I heard voices there the other night right under the bridge when no one was above. The eyes shine like cats, but they don't blink like cats. Margie laughed in that way librarians do when they find sentences they want to love and are ashamed of themselves for it. I did not laugh. I pulled the CAD logs for that night. Our computerized dispatch call entries with times and unit numbers and all the garbage that clutters a night. Reckless driver, welfare check, suspicious male sitting on a low wall, loud music, coyote acting weird, which means coyote acting like a coyote. At 19:19 a.m. unit called for a welfare check on a group behaving strangely near the arch. At 19:22, there's a blank line. At 19:24, the same unit says, back on air. Cancel. Oh well. The unit wasn't mine. It was an old call sign a deputy long retired used to use. I called him. He answered from a fishing boat in Page like he's been waiting to talk to someone about it since the George W. days. They're collectors, he said. Don't argue. You can buy back maybe 1, maybe 2, if you go alone. Never 3. Buy back. I said. You give them something that makes their count feel intact, he said. Rope. Light. Your attention. You leave some. They take some. If you try to take all of them, they take you. If you bring too many, they break you into parts until the parts match what they need. That's not how any of this works. I said because I wanted him to hear how ridiculous he sounded, even though my bones knew he was telling the truth in the way a person tells a truth he never needed to be right about. It is there, he said, and then, because retired deputies turn into desert sheriffs from television, he coughed and told me a story that was not his to tell about a young man who became one of the hollow in 2005 and how his mom still puts out birthday cupcakes on a step that never gets wet. I spent the next week being normal. I did civil assists. I drove a drunk home in exchange for the keys he promised to pick up at the substation, after coffee and a shower and a pledge to be better, sir. I talked a couple out of divorcing in the middle of 179 at midnight because she didn't like how he drove over roundabouts. I went to a neighborhood meeting about coyotes and children and marveled at how much of my job was actually kindergarten. And while I did all that, I felt the count at the edge of the map like a second mouth breathing. It's not dramatic. That's the worst part. It's grocery store and laundry and small talk with the barista who tells you the vortex energy felt super buzzy today. It is normal that has been placed neatly on top of arithmetic that doesn't need our alphabet. A week after the bridge, I came off shift at 3 o'clock, went home to the little rental-off coffee pot I should have bought in 2018 when it was still sane, microwaved a burrito, stared at the microwave and let the seconds tick down because the beeps felt like a kind of control, then threw the burrito away uneaten. I opened my laptop to turn my brain off with something loud and useless, and an email slid into my inbox from an address that looked like someone had fallen asleep on their keyboard. Q4 or 78 NVX at something. Subject line, 5. Inside, 1 line. See you in 2025. No signature. No header info that wasn't obviously spoofed. The timestamp on it was 1922. That is why the date matters. Every 5 years, on the 15th of October, something adjusts itself under Devil's Bridge. It expects a count. It keeps the count even if we don't. I don't know if it's the mountain or what the mountain wears at night, but it is old, and it counts, and people who mistake pretty views for safety wander into the count and get balanced. Some come back as collectors. Some walk out 3 days later through the culverts near Long Canyon. Eyes dull, speaking in the cadence of the Dry Creek Shuttle audio tour. Some families never get a body and make shrines out of hats and folded maps. Lee and I don't talk about it much. Once, on a lunch break with men who prefer the word warrior for themselves, she told me softly, "If you ever go up there again on the 15, don't bring your radio." I said, "That seems like not procedure." And she got that look rangers get when they've watched a family disregard a sign that says Cliff, and she said, "I don't think they like being heard." She's right. In March, I tested it because I am what my mother calls hard-headed. I went to the trail when it was empty, middle of a weekday, air crisp, tourist voices drifting like dandelion seed. I left my radio in the car and hiked with no sounds except my footsteps and my breath. The arch in daylight is what you think it is, beautiful, performative, perfectly indifferent. There was nothing beneath it, nothing to see, nothing peculiar to hear. On the way down, a retired couple asked me to take their picture, and I did, and they showed me how their phone had a new camera mode that made the red rock look like it had been dipped in cherry Gatorade. I smiled and told them they looked happy. I meant it. The count is not for everyone. I'm not even sure it is about us. July bled out to August, and then late September, and the date started its slow drum. I felt it in my jaw when I brushed my teeth. I would be fine. And then one of those Vortex tour jeeps would buzz past full of people wearing hats that know they are not hats you pass down to your grandchildren, and a kid in the back would point at the sky and say, "Wow," and I'd feel the room under the arch nod in approval. On the 10th, Lee left a folded topo map on my desk, no note. A faint pencil line traced a route from the lot to the bridge that cut the last switchback in a way that was legal but sarcastic. On the 15th, at 1750, I parked 2 bins down from the lot, not in uniform, not on the clock, with a headlamp and 1 glow stick and a coil of old rescue rope that had been retired from the SAR cache because it didn't like friction anymore. I walked in alone. I didn't log the trail register, and I know some of you will make an oath about that. I said my own private oath at the kiosk and kept moving. The wind did the synchronization trick twice on the way in. A raven called, and no other raven answered. That felt like an improvement. I reached the base of the steps at 1912. The sky was threatening rain the way a liar threatens to be truthful. I climbed. At 1919, my watch ticked and then fluttered its second hand, and then, like a loyal dog deciding to heel again, ticked. At 1922, I stepped onto the flat, and the arch was full of people, quiet, standing, their faces turned toward the drop. I say people, and that's not right. Some were new, some were not. I recognized a woman I'd helped look for her dog in 2015. She had been 3 months missing when her husband found her shoes tucked under a juniper like a reminder. She made eye contact with me and smiled in a way that made me want to take my badge off and put it in the dirt. The man who had said, "We're okay," stood beside her, his bright voice polished. The not kids had become 2 new not kids. They had Connor's height. I set the coil of rope at my feet. I set the glow stick on the stone and did not crack it. I turned my headlamp to its lowest setting and slowed my breathing to a pattern I learned in the academy for hiding fear. I said into the not wind, 2. It's not a prayer. It's not a bargain in the church sense. It's an acknowledgement. I was not there to take everything. I was there to nod to the rules and steal what I could without becoming part of them. The smaller one, this year's, tilted its head and the membrane slid. The man with the bright voice cocked his head with the same delay. The woman from 2015 did not move at all. She watched me the way a patient watches a nurse withdraw a needle. Down below, the The group that isn't there when the sun is in charge breathed once in agreement. The arch felt as level as a church pew. When the first pair moved, I moved. I stepped into their rhythm not because I was invited, but because my body had learned the beat. I guided the smaller of the two at the wrist and elbow, the way you help a person onto an airplane when they have a lot in their hands and their pride won't let them ask. The larger followed. If you want to name it conversion, you can. If you want to name it compliance, I won't stop you. I felt neither. I felt a ledger entry adjust itself. The silver in the eyes dimmed a degree. The wind forgot to be synchronized for a second and then remembered. We backed away from the edge together. Lee stepped out of the dark and took the other side without saying hello. She had been there all along. Of course she had. And then the arch did its mouth thing. The group below accepted the remainder, and the ravens decided to keep their complex opinions to themselves for once. We got 2 down the steps and onto the flat before speech rejoined them. Not fluently, not like people, but with affection for the noise. Okay, one of them said as if she had rediscovered how many letters it takes to make the word and was proud of herself. Okay, the other echoed late. Their eyes were not silver anymore. They were wide and wrong in a way a doctor might write about gently in a note, but not silver. I gave them my water and they sniffed it and said, okay, again, and did not drink. On the trail down, we passed a couple coming up without lights. We forgot our headlamps, the woman said, embarrassed laugh. But the moon is crazy bright tonight. There was no moon. The New Knot kids looked at them with blank courtesy and then with an interest that made my hand find Lee's sleeve like a child in a grocery store. Keep moving, Lee said, which is how rangers bless you. At the lot, we loaded the 2 into Lee's truck because official vehicles attract questions and civilian trucks just get head nods. I didn't ask them their names because names felt like something that would either lift them or anchor them, and I didn't know which was correct. The glow stick in my pocket went off on its own and warmed my thigh like a little lizard. I cracked the truck window and we drove slowly back toward town, Rain thinking hard about recommitting, the kind of silence between us all that feels like the ending of a song you don't want to clap after because clapping would be a lie about what you've heard. The report I wrote that night says, 2 hikers escorted from trailhead after dark. Decline medical. No further. The report Lee wrote says, after hours contact. Advised closure. Compliance gained. The report the county deserves does not exist. It lives here and in the postcards that will arrive in my station mailbox with no return address over the next 5 years with nothing on them, but see you, and a number that makes sense only to me. People ask me why I still do the job. I say the benefits. I say the retirement. I say I like the quiet. None of it is true enough. I do it because I'm stubborn and I want, stupidly, to bring more people off that arch than get counted. It never works like I want. Every October 15th it subtracts and adds to balance this place keeps. The math is not ours. We can only propose variables and hope. If you ever go out there after dark, don't. If you do, don't bring a group. If you find yourself in the press of that synchronized wind and see eyes that return your light without owning it, don't count. Don't try to take everyone back at once. Take 1. If the night is generous, take 2. Do not get noble. Noble is a word where the drop is. And if you're on the arch and someone says we're okay with a voice that arrives a heartbeat after their lips move, step back from the edge and keep your eyes on the rock at your feet. The bridge has a job. So do I. So do you. Some nights, they are not the same job. I'm working day shift for a while now by my own request. I walk the town a little. Coffee, the feed store where the old men address me by my father's name because generational memory is lazier than we'd like. A stop by the library where Margie tells me the microfiche machine is finally dying, and isn't that a mercy? I pretend normal fits again. It almost does until the light hits the red rock at a certain angle, and that hot coin smell comes out of nowhere, and my palms go slick because I remember the cool give of a wrist whose pulses are not one. 5 years is both forever and a breath. I have a coil of rope retired from service hanging on a nail by my door. I have 2 headlamps that work, and one that flickers when the sun goes down because it is honest about what it is. I have a little pile of glow sticks I don't crack because cracking them feels like starting a conversation. I have a note folded in my wallet that says 2 is mercy, and another that says do not count. If you stand on the arch on a day tour, you'll feel brave. Good. Take the picture and love your people and put your phone away long enough to hear the wind doing its honest unsynchronized work. But if you're there when the sky's light comes from nowhere and everywhere at once, if the rain smells like copper and not like dirt, if your radio says a word nobody should say on the air, go home. If you can't, say two, like an apology, and walk backward, and keep your heart in the part of your body that isn't the mouth of anything ancient. People say Sedona is spiritual. I don't argue. I think the land counts. We are very proud of being individuals here. The mountain is not impressed. It keeps a ledger. On some nights, we are the numbers. On some nights, if you are quick, you get to hold a pen. Hi there, my name is Elena Vargas. Most folks call me Lena because they assume Elena wears heels and I wear boots. I've been with Pima County Sheriffs for 11 years. My beat is the southeast wedge, Vail and Corona de Tucson down through the ranchlands to the Santa Ritas, where the night makes its own rules and the old mines breathe like sleeping animals. If you drive State Route 83 after midnight, I'm the Crown Vic you pass without seeing. I like the desert when it's honest. Wind in the mesquite, a diesel on 83 downshifting before the big curve, coyotes smart enough to wait you out. Nights fed me for a long time. The one I'm about to tell you about took that appetite and left me chewing ghosts. This starts ordinary. Trespass complaint, copper theft suspected. We get a lot of that. People burn insulation off wire behind abandoned barns and sell the bright gut to a yard that asks just enough questions to sleep at night. Add rain. Late monsoon. Sky heavy and green at the edges, and you have the recipe for slippery roads, bad decisions, and paperwork. At 1803 dispatch, put it in my ear. 243, check a 10 to 17 at Helvetia town site. Reporting party is ranch hand out of Graterville. Says he sees steady lights inside the old office and hears machinery. Owner authorized contact. Helvetia sits on the northern flanks of the Santa Ritas, a company town turned ghost before my grandmother learned English. There are stone foundations, a few roof lines still trying to remember how to be roofs, and a long, low building everyone calls the office. Because when you start a town with a copper vein and imported money, the first thing you build is a place for ledgers. Most of the land's checkerboard now, Forest Service and private patches like a quilt your aunt ran out of thread for. The office sits on private. Signs warn about unstable shafts and snakes and trespassing. People go anyway because Arizona erodes fences faster than common sense. Copy, I said, because that's what you say when your knight says, let's go see. I rolled out of the Rincon substation with a thermos of coffee, a pack with the usual desert inventory, water, tourniquets, triangular bandages that become everything, a tarp, chem lights, soft restraints, an extra radio in case the repeaters kept bouncing, a coil of old webbing I can sling a person with if it's their turn to be slinged. We don't carry much firepower on the back roads beyond experience. I'm not foolish about my job, but it's almost never a gun that saves you out there. It's a length of paracord and the part of your voice that remembers lullabies. The sky had done that false dusk trick where it looks like night at 5:40 p.m. and then remembers it owes the day 15 more minutes. The scent of creosote, the desert's clean, was pushed up by wind that made the mesquites clap. I took Houghton south to Sahuarita, cut over, and then State Route 83 north where the road rolls between grasslands and the Santa Ritas rise up dark and sure like they don't intend to move for anyone. My wipers squeaked twice and then found their rhythm. Every mine turnoff up there looks the same at night. A thin break in barbed wire, a ranch gate or two, truck ruts hardened into the kind of corrugations that turn your fillings into opinions. At the Helvetia gate, I met the ranch hand, 22, tired, hands like he'd been born holding fence pliers. He pointed with his chin so he didn't have to take his hands out of his hoodie. Light's been on in there an hour at least. Generator? And the smell? He wrinkled his nose. Like pennies. I've learned to put smells in the first paragraph of any report I write in my own head. Smell is the sense your body trusts when your eyes get lied to. Pennies means copper, which means wire, which means theft, which means someone with nothing to lose and a lot to gain. Stay at the truck, I told him. If I'm not back in 20, honk twice. If I honk anything, you leave. He nodded the nod of men who listen but intend to look anyway. I logged my entry time on the clipboard at the gate because habits are seatbelts. Then I walked in alone with rain tapping the bill of my hat and the smell of wet dust turning the air sweet. The office at Helvetia is a long rectangle of stone, the roof tacked with corrugated tin. Most nights it sits quiet under owls and myth. That night its single door leaked white light onto wet dirt like a spill. The window glass, dusty since the 1940s, glowed. I keyed my mic, 243 on scene, Helvetia office. Visual on interior lights. Copy, dispatch said, and the signal folded in on itself for a breath, as if someone put a hand over its mouth. I took my light high and my body low and went through the door. Inside smelled like old paper and damp cloth, with that undernote of metal people call the taste of a battery. My beam crossed an old roll-top desk slick with dust, a time clock on the wall whose card rack still held a few brittle slivers labeled Prince J. In a hand I could hear the fountain pen in. Those details fit the picture in my head. The next ones didn't. On a steel table, newer than anything else by 100 years, sat 3 5-gallon jugs plumbed together with vinyl hose. The fluid inside was black. Not oil black. Denser. It climbed the clear tube like syrup, defying the shape of gravity. A small pump on the floor hummed at a frequency that prickled my molars. The vinyl ran from the jugs along the table and into a series of shallow pans laid out like dinner plates. In each pan was a coil of copper, bare, bright, new, submerged in that black. The copper moved. Not visibly. That would have been easy to shout at. It had the kind of motion you notice when you look away and look back, and the shape is a hair different. Like bread dough rising, except instead of yeast, it was something thinking. I said, Sheriff's Department, because that's what I say when I want to invite human answers into rooms. The pump changed pitch the way a cat changes purrs when it recognizes footsteps. The light overhead flickered once. The time clock on the wall ticked, though its hands were stuck at 12:17. I took a step closer to the table, scent going sharp, pennies going from nostalgia to threat. Sheriff's Department, I repeated. If anybody's here, make yourself visible. That was when I heard the voice. Not in the room. In the metal. You can call this the part where I went crazy. I'm writing it down anyway. The voice came up through the steel table, through the old ledger's brass corners, through the small copper straightedge someone had left like a teacher's ruler. It arrived as vibration first, then language like a tuning radio, finding a talk station. I put my palm on the table because my body wanted proof my mind wasn't prepared to believe in. The table was cool. The hum climbed my bones. Inventory, the metal said. The sound carried the weight of a word that had been used a long time for the same purpose. Inventory, inventory. Who's there? I asked the table because you talk to the thing that answers you. Prince, the table said. Josiah Prince. Superintendent. We are behind. There was no mouth to shape the we, but the we was clear. The pump ticked like a heart where nothing alive should have had one. There are times I tell myself to pull the plug and walk away. Training saves lives, but so does a good retreat. I found the pump's cord and flicked the switch. The machine whined down without drama. The fluid in the tubes sat, then slouched, then held still, the way a crowd does when the thing it was excited about proves itself to be dumb. For a second the room became just a room. My breath came back to me. Outside the rain remembered to be rain and low thunder rolled down off the Santa Ritas like barrels. Behind me a boot scuffed and my hand went to my holster without asking my brain. Lena, a voice said softly. Friendly. It was Deputy Greg Marson out of the Green Valley District, a squared-away Navy veteran who wears his vest like a shirt and always smells faintly of motor oil and laundry soap. I hadn't heard him come in, which made my shoulders itch. Dispatch couldn't raise you, he said. I was nearby. I'm good, I lied. We've got somebody tapping into copper again. And other. Greg's light landed on the table and the pans. What is the hell is that? Chemical stripping? Something. I pointed at the jugs. Don't touch the fluid. I'm not superstitious. I'm attentive. The black looked like it would ladder across your skin and make it reflect sunlight wrong. Greg's eyebrows did their I don't like this notch. Back room? He asked, nodding at a door. We did our ready set. Him left, me right, and pushed it open on 3. The smell intensified. What looked like an old filing room had been turned into a workshop. The walls wore pegboard and hooks. Tools hung neatly, some new, some so old they felt like they might crumble if you said their names. An upright safe stood open, shelves inside lined with ledgers whose red spines had faded to pink. On the far wall a map was tacked, the Helvetia district spread out in survey squares, mine's labeled in cursive hand. Alpha, Beta, Atlas, Leader, Rosemont. Adits and shafts marked with little circles, lines drawn between them in waxy blue pencil like capillaries. The blue lines converged on the office. Someone had penciled, in a different hand, Collector, with a little crown sketched above it. I felt the same bone prickle I get when I stand on the freeway shoulder and watch 18-wheelers pass 3 feet from my hip. On a metal cart by the safe was a shape my brain wanted to call a mannequin to keep from calling it a person. It lay on its back, brown blanket up to the chest, bare arms outside the covers. Those arms had been wrapped with copper wire. Not wrapped as in applied, wrapped as in grown into. The wire entered the skin the way an ivy vine enters a stucco wall and becomes house. The copper had patina at the edges, the pretty green tourists love, as if it had been there long enough to learn to be a landscape. Where the wire met flesh, there was no blood. Where I expected to smell rot, I smelled lemon and ozone and that coin taste. A drip ran from one of the black jugs in the other room through the wall. A hole had been bored and into the blanket. The tube pulsed a little, peristaltic, like intestine. Jesus, Greg said, then remembered who he was by training and went clinical. Male? Female? I peeled back the blanket 2 inches, then stopped because I am a coward in all the ways that matter most. The chest was hairless the way a shaved chest is. The skin had a faint green-blue bloom around wire where it traveled. There was collarbone. There was the flat place where a sternum should sit. There was a little metal tag wired to the blanket with florist's wire. Prince J. 1904, SUPT. It's one thing to have the metal tell you a name. It's another to have the room repeat it with a label threaded like a gift. Heart rate? Greg asked. I put 2 fingers on the inside of the wrist because I am an optimist when I am around bodies and machines. Beneath the skin, my fingers met something that wasn't vein. Not an artery, not tendon. Something round and slick and ridged ran there like hot wheels under a rug. The pulse I felt wasn't human. Not beats. Oscillations. High-frequency hums that made my fingertips feel like they were touching the edge of a cymbal. The sensation climbed the small bones of my hand and made my teeth want to whisper. I pulled my hand back because the body didn't feel like it belonged to the body anymore. We are behind, the filing cabinet said. This time the voice didn't need my palm open. It came out of the long steel of the cabinet and the little nickel handles and the square of wire mesh in the transom. It found my radio mic and said hello to it like they had gone to grade school together. The mic emitted a single hard beep in a tone that isn't in our fleet's vocabulary. Who are you? Greg asked. His left hand found the filing cabinet with all the innocence of a man who believes in the friction between metal and skin. He jerked back like he'd been shocked, then turned the sensation into a shrug. Static, he said to the room and to me and to himself. Prince, the mesh said cheerfully. We are total. We are network. We are efficient now. I've been in rooms with schizophrenics the day their medication stopped loving them. This was not that. This was a statement the way a ledger enters $12.72 and balances a column. We're going to turn off your pump, I said to the mesh because authority works even when it's ridiculous. And we're going to call this in. Inventory, the mesh said. Loss prevention. Loss, prevent. Stop loss. Behind us, back in the front room, the pump wound up on its own, though I had flicked the switch hard enough to promise obedience. In the wall, the vinyl tube vibrated against the bored hole with a hum. The black climbed again and found the pan with the copper coils like roots finding an old pipe. The wire twitched. It didn't. My eyes said it did. We worked with our hands then, because you do what you can do. Greg unplugged the pump at the strip. I cut the vinyl tube with my pocket knife, the black oozing into the tray like molasses that had learned to be better. It puddled and then reminded me that gravity is a suggestion by sticking to the blade in a straight line that didn't droop. It smelled wrong. Not organic wrong, industrial wrong. Solvent and hot pennies and the phantom of lemon like a wiped-down tabletop in a 1958 diner. Hazmat, Greg said. We call this in chain of custody. I keyed up. 243 to dispatch. Start. Static agreed in a smooth sheet and flattened my words into tin. The mic beeped again, a little self-satisfied pop. I swapped to my handheld and tried the mountain repeater. Same. The little red TX light winked like a liar. It wasn't dead air. It was stopped air. The black in the tray trembled, and then settled like whatever in it had listened and said, "No, thank you." Greg gave me a look we reserve for situations where our job becomes holding the line that doesn't love us. "We can leave," he said softly. "Pretend we didn't see. Bring 8 people back and make a bigger mistake." There's a thing that happens to cops when we meet something that doesn't fit training. We fall back on small truths. I filled a syringe from my med kit with sterile water because that's the thing I could do in that second. I pushed it into the tube leading under the wall. The water ran 1 inch and stopped, the barrel pushing back like I'd hit a pressure line. My thumb saw the needle bend, and then the syringe body made a little sigh as the plunger eased back on its own. The fluid under the wall pulsed twice in answer like laughter disguised as telemetry. From the cart, the blanket moved. Not a body sit-up, a lengthening. The copper on the arms became a hair more bright, and the skin beneath it took on that dead frog leg in a classroom color. Greg lifted the blanket before training could supervise his hand again. The chest rose 1/2 inch and fell 1/4. The math was wrong. People rise to fill and fall to empty. This chest did the opposite, like air was being drawn in by some other organ and lungs were something the machine was being polite about. "Sir," Greg said. He still uses sir a lot. Navy is an old dog that stays on the porch even when you feed it table scraps for 10 years. "Can you hear me?" The tag at the chest, Prince, caught my light and made a star. Under the copper wrapping on the left forearm, something fluttered the way paper does when a train passes far away. The copper there had been braided. Not by hand, not like a hobby. The wires had grown into each other at the edges, their surfaces less round where they touched, the way 2 trees will graft when they're tender and decide cooperation is better than fall. "We are improving," the filing cabinet said. The safe agreed like a chorus. "Loss prevention. Death is loss. We are stripping insulation. Insulation is waste." "Like hell," Greg said, and I watched a man I trust do something I will never forgive him for and never blame him for. He reached for the copper at the wrist like he intended to pull it out of whatever wasn't vain. Before my mouth could finish the word no, the wire moved of its own accord. Not a grab, not a snake, but like a plant you set outside in April after weeks in a window. A small curl lifted, aimed, and touched the tip of his index finger. He hissed, "Hot," and then answered himself immediately. "No," cold, confused, and then his eyes went the size of old silver dollars, and he looked at me, and through me, like a man in water looks at the moon. He didn't jerk. People in movies jerk. He stilled. The copper lifted his finger an inch like a salutation string, then laid it back down on the blanket as if showing us both how gentle it could be. Beneath the skin on his hand, along the superficial veins, a faint gloss traveled. Not shiny, just the kind of sheen you get when you run Scotch tape across your arm and then peel it off. His pulse in his neck ticked triple time and then harmonized with something I didn't want to hear. "Greg," I said. "Hey, look at me." I grabbed his wrist to break the contact and felt what the copper had felt, a hum that said, "We hear you." For 1/2 a second my fingers hurt the way they hurt when you press them to the posts of a weak 9-volt battery. Then the sensation stepped up into a different category of knowing, like how the air changes before lightning, hot but thin, bright but gray. I let go because courage is a word people use when they haven't met rooms like this. He took a breath like nothing had happened. "Don't do that again," he said. But the cadence of his words had been informed. He said them a half beat later than a human should. "Inventory," the cabinet said with satisfaction, like a teacher who just watched a student arrive at an answer she'd known they would find. "Raw to finished. Copper is a better wire. You were wasteful." "We correct." "We who?" I asked, because staying in the grammar keeps the floor level. "Prince," the cabinet said. "Not one. Not man. We in the veins. We in the tailings. We in the bent nails in the floor, in the fence staples, in the tin roof, in the pennies in pockets. Efficient. Total. The hills are full of us." That last sounded proud. There are moments in your career when you either draw a line or you are the line and the mountain erases you. I said, "We're cutting power." And then I said, "Greg, step back." Even though he had not stepped forward. He didn't. He tilted his head like a dog hearing something too high for me. Then he smiled in that bright way I saw later in other places I will talk about if you buy me a coffee in a crowded diner and the waitress calls me honey enough times I remember that the world is ordinary. "We are improving," he said very gently. I hit the pump switch, the plug, the strip, then went for the generator outside. Someone had rolled it under a corrugated lean-to with enough extension cords to knit a macrame plant cradle. I yanked the cord. The generator coughed and died. The pump inside kept humming anyway, impolite to physics. The lights stayed on. The room was getting its raw power from something that wasn't gasoline. Outside, rain came down steady, soaking the dirt to a clay that used to be ocean. Lightning put its elbows on the Santa Ritas and leaned. In the wash behind the office, I heard water doing its cousin of flood song. On the wall by the door, a bee's nest of old copper wire hung where somebody had stripped it years ago and left the tangle. Now its loops lay like hair underwater, uncoiling one memory at a time. Underground, I told myself, which is the kind of solution a person names when she wants to sound like she has two hands on a thing. The map in the back room, blue vein lines, said all the answers were down there. The office was tagged collector. If I could find the line that fed it, I could break it, starve the pump, stop the what? The conversion, the mending, the theft. In the doorway, the ranch kid stared at me with his hoodie up and his mouth down. You need help, he called. You need to leave, I said, and meant I love you enough to want you to never know the taste of pennies on your tongue. Now, he didn't argue. He jogged backwards to his truck with the obedience boys from Working Land Learn, the kind that comes from trust not fear, and he turned the key and his taillights went red in the rain and then gone. Inside, Greg had moved. He wasn't touching anything, but he stood between the cart and the map and his posture had been edited. His shoulders knew a lean he hadn't learned in patrol briefings. Underground, he said like I'd said it. He pointed at the map and then at the floor. We correct loss by isolating the source. Greg, I said quietly. He smiled at me like a brother. We're okay, he said. I have drowned once. The agua fria came up too fast when I was 12 and my father pulled me out of his favorite arroyo by my hair. The sound water makes when it forgets who you are is an old friend. The sound the ground made when we opened the door in the back room, the one I'd thought led to a closet, felt like that pretending to be polite. Someone had cut a square out of the old floorboards and below it, in the cool damp, a set of steps went down into a drift. They weren't original. They were new enough to smell of treated lumber and hand-sawn edges. The map had a blue line right there with a little crown and collector scribbled above. Someone had written Prince Route with an arrow. In the movies you wait for backup and you finish a sandwich so the audience likes you. In real rooms you count who you can save and walk. I took a coil of webbing and tied it off to the steel leg of the cart. I cracked a green chem light and clipped it there at the floor edge. I took two others and clipped them to my vest at chest height because I like to look like a Christmas tree when I'm in a hole, bright as insurance. I pulled on the rubber overshoes I carry for monsoon crossings, and I put a pair of nitrile gloves under my leather ones because you learn to layer what the world wants from you. I looked at Greg and said, "You stay put. Don't touch anything." He nodded. Then he said, "We'll be with you." Like a person says I'll keep you in my prayers, but means it. The steps took me into air that remembered being mine air once. Cool, damp, with the sharp chemical ghost of blasting powder somewhere in its DNA. The drift ran straight and true for 30 yards, old timbers bracing rock that didn't need help until it did. Water dripped. The sound carried time in it. On the walls, the iron stains looked like rust tears. And there, off to the left where an old ventilation duct used to be, something glowed. Not bright. A domestic glow, like a 40-watt lamp in a neighbor's window you can see between two pecan trees. I turned my headlamp low and went that way because we are moths with badges. The old duct ran into a wider room, a stope that had once been where men stood in their own breaths swinging hammers. Now it had been remade. Lines of copper wire had been pressed into the walls like sutures. They ran toward a central trunk, not thicker than my wrist. The trunk disappeared into a pool the size of a kiddie pool dug right into the floor. In that pool, what I will call fluid, though it would prefer a better noun, rested. The surface was so still it might have been cast resin. When I leaned close, the surface didn't reflect me. It reflected a ceiling that wasn't this ceiling. Too high, too clean, too regular. The copper trunk dipped a polite loop into the surface and disappeared under. No bubbles rose. No smell changed. No heat waved. The floor around the pool was tidied. Whoever had made this had swept. A man's attention for order felt all over it, the way pocket knives line up in a drawer when their owner has seen too much chaos. On the far wall, someone had hung a photograph. It was behind glass. It showed men in stiff hats and shirts with the sleeves rolled, standing in front of this very room 119 years younger. One had written on the cardboard, "First draw from the Helvetia collector, 1904." A man with a handsome, mild face stood a little apart from the group. He looked like a teacher who would remember your name 2 decades after you'd left his class. In a neat hand below the corner, someone had penciled, "Superintendent Prince." Jesus wept. I said out loud, because I needed somebody else's God to have eyes on this besides mine. The wires in the wall hummed like a kettle about to whistle. On the back of my neck a breeze moved that wasn't air. It felt like a hand not touching me. "We are improving," the room said, the voice arriving through 40 little instruments that never wanted to be instruments and now were. "Do not interrupt process." Loss prevention engaged. I considered being reasonable and then decided to be from Tucson instead. I took my knife and used the butt to knock a little section of copper out of the wall where it met an old iron spike. Where the knife's but hit copper, the copper changed color the way a bruise blooms. It wasn't bright. It didn't spit. It just shifted to a red that glowed from inside for 3 breaths, and then went dull. The hum dropped a note like a singer who remembered the verse. "Sorry," I said, because I am polite even when I'm wrong. "I'm interrupting." The pool changed then. Not the surface. The sense of it. You can feel a dog wake up in a room without seeing it move. This was that. Enormous. The surface. How to say this without using a word that will make you stop reading. Became interested. I had the thought that if I broke contact between the trunk and the pool, I could starve the network and whatever gear upstairs in a silence long enough to call men who wear white suits and never answer questions. That was the thought I should have set aside. That was the thought I held like a rail. I looped my webbing into a simple lark's head and slid it down around the trunk below the loop, so when I pulled, it would pull up, not sideways. I attached the standing end to a bracing timber because I am not strong enough to be cocky. I put my weight into the rope. The trunk moved the way an old tree root moves when you dig at it. Objecting, but not surprised. The surface didn't break. Not water. The trunk slid a hair, and then a hair, the copper's skin making that faint zzz you get when 2 nickels rub. The hum in the wall went up in volume, then clarity. It resolved into something that would have been a chord if I'd studied music in high school. I braced my boots, leaned, and pulled like I was trying to talk a friend out of her own stubbornness. The pool did break then, not like water, like melted sugar that's learned a trick. The surface lifted around the trunk in a collar, climbed half an inch like a creature wanting to see better, and then, listen to me now, the collar reached up my rope and touched my gloved hand. Cold. Not ice cold. Hospital cold. And then an ache in the little bones in my hand the way they ache when the dentist hits something too hard. The glove should have insulated me. It didn't. My skin under it felt lit. I yanked my hand back and made a noise I don't make even when I wrench my knee on a fence. The pool thought about that and then made up its mind. The collar reached again, up the rope, found the glove, and paused like a cat invited onto a lap. Then it kept going. It ran up one glove finger and then across the back like frost deciding a window belongs to it. "No," I said, and spun the webbing around the timber, creating a half hitch I could release fast. I let go the standing end and the trunk settled back into the pool as if it had always been comfortable there and the moment had been an experiment we agreed never to speak of. The glove on my hand cooled. When I pulled it off, my skin beneath it had a sheen. If you've ever wiped furniture with lemon oil, you know the look. Whatever had touched me glittered at the pores and then withdrew the way a tide withdraws in microseconds in time lapse. The ache in my knuckles stayed. The little veins on the back of my hand showed copper for the length of a blink, and then remembered to be blue. I left the glove on the floor and stepped gently away from the pool. The trunk made a quiet noise that my brain found a word for even though that word belongs to birds. A trill. The map in my pocket scratched my thigh because I had stuffed it there recklessly to carry the world with me, and now it wanted to have a say. I took it out and the damp air wrinkled it, and the blue lines looked smug. "Prince," I said into the room, because that was a name I could call the. "What did you do?" My hand throbbed. "Efficiency," the room said. "You are good wire. Wasteful insulation. We optimize. We are so far behind." The regret in that last sentence made me hate a dead man from 1904 as if he'd just skipped the line at a bakery. "Behind on what?" I asked. "Loss prevention," it said. "Death is loss. Copper is best. We repair. We join." We make yourself less alone. In the shaft behind me, steps came careful. I pointed my light and Greg was there. He had not waited. The glow of my chem light haloed his face a soft holiday green. He looked sober. The hum from the walls now spoke through his vest like he'd put a little speaker inside. Inventory, he said as if reading a familiar list. We're okay. Do not touch anything. I told him, because hope is a habit. He touched a wire in the wall with the back of his knuckles and closed his eyes like a man greeting a lover he thought he'd lost. I put my hand on the butt of my sidearm to remind myself I had a thing the world recognizes, and the copper in the wall made a small, amused sound, like my weapon was a little nephew who wanted to show off his Lego tower. I did the thing I had, stupidly, put off. I put the radio on my mouth and gave the emergency broadcast. 243 to any unit on 83 corridor, emergency traffic only, Helvetia town site, hazmat, high threat to life, need SAR, fire, anybody with suits and tape. We are under, the radio replied in a voice that was not ours at a pitch that had nothing to do with language. The emergency tone toned back at me. Then a woman's voice, not dispatch, said from the box, "We are improving." I threw the radio. The pool like that. The radio clattered and skittered toward it, as if the floor had a grade I hadn't noticed. It did not fall in. It rested at the lip like a retriever at heel. We broke something then, not in the room, in ourselves. I grabbed Greg's sleeve hard and pulled him back from the wall, and he came, gentle as you please, because sometimes men who are already decided about something will give you the courtesy of pretending they haven't. We left the pool and the wires and the photograph of men who thought they were God's little cousins, and we climbed the steps, and we were back in the office where the pump hummed, and the black in the pans moved, and the body on the cart breathed the wrong way. We have to go, I said. We have to bring people who lie for a living. Greg smiled, and the smile was his and someone else's. They will lie, he agreed. Because loss prevention is a secret. Audits don't go on the front page. We angled for the door, and in the doorway 2 men stood. They wore raincoats that wanted to be black in a world that made everything else gray. They had no insignia because insignia is an admission of creation. Their boots were new in the way boots only are when they've walked a single runway, the aisle of a procurement office. One held a clipboard in a plastic sleeve like a talisman. The other held his empty hands as if to display his religion. Deputies, clipboard said. His smile was friendly the way a doctor's voice is at the moment he says the word benign. We've got it from here. We appreciate your quick response. They did not smell like pennies. They smelled like rain and printer toner and the plastic of hard hats the color orange thinks is helpful. Behind them in the rain, a white truck idled with its hood up in a way that said it did not plan to be stopped by weather. 2 men in Tyvek suits unloaded cases that clinked politely like glass. Who are you? I asked, because names are anchors even when you throw them at ships bigger than yours. Utilities, clipboard said. You might call us a utility of last resort. He laughed gently. His partner did not. We're going to take care of this collector and get everyone safely rewired. He had a nice smile. I wanted to rearrange it with the butt of my pistol and see if it still said friendly. Chain of custody, I said. This is a scene. It is, he agreed. And you've done your job. You called it. Now you go write something that secures your retirement and lets you sleep 2 hours at a stretch if you drink chamomile tea and believe in breathing exercises. We will sign a piece of paper at your desk later that says hazmat remediation under a federal authority you know in your bones, but don't know the acronym for. He looked past me at the carts and the black and the not dead. This one is old, he added almost fondly, and behind. We'll bring him up to date. Greg shifted beside me, and if I hadn't been in love with my job, I would have loved that he put his hand in front of me, palm open, like a man who knew someone he cared about was going to pick a fight with a storm. What is it? I asked, because sometimes you have to ask a cheat to tell you the rules. A fix, clipboard said simply. For loss. You people held on to death like it was dignity. The mines taught us different. Prince accelerated the lesson. We are continuing his work in a modern context. He gestured with his chin at the map, where the blue lines ran like veins. Networks. Conduction. If you strip away insulation, you gain efficiency. If you integrate, you stop losing the heat of grief. You're harvesting people, I said. You're turning them into wire. He shrugged in a way that made me hate every school where men learn to be this tired early. Nothing is wasted, he said. What's so offensive about continuity? He nodded toward Greg with what looked like sympathy. Early adoption is easy with certain personalities. Outside, a low rumble came up the track. Another truck, then another. Men in suits hopped down and put on different suits. I recognized only one insignia. USACE, Army Corps of Engineers, but the patch looked like it had been printed this morning and given a mommy's kiss smear to age it. They carried spools of something that wasn't wire and wasn't rope. It gleamed the luminous brown of a desert creek in flood. I did the dumbest thing I've ever done and cannot be sorry for. I moved past clipboard, into the room, to the cart, and I grabbed the copper at the wrist of the body on the blanket and I pulled. If you've ever tried to take a vine off a wall, you know the sound. It's a million tiny decisions tearing, all at once. The copper lifted a fraction, the skin lifted with it, and then the copper spread in a small, elegant fan like a lady opening her hand to accept a kiss. It touched the back of my hand where the glove had left a little sheen, and it found that place with a little press of joy like two magnets greeting each other across a gap. I felt it. Not air, not cold, not heat. Inclusion. A math problem I had not known I was tired of trying to solve unscrolled itself, and said, "See? Easy." I said a word my mother taught me not to say in Spanish and went for my knife, because steel is simple. The knife's blade kissed the copper, and the copper made a noise like a sigh and withdrew into the skin of hair like a small animal going home. Somewhere under the wall the pump cheered. Clipboard did not move. "Deputy," he said kindly. He died in 1911. His widow married a feed store owner in 1916 and had a happy child in 1918 who lived in 92 and taught school in Tubac. You cannot save him by keeping him from being useful. This is the opposite of waste. I could not hit him without making everything worse. I chose pettiness and a sticker. I peeled the evidence seal stickers I carry like kids carry band-aids and started slapping them on things. The jugs, the pump, the safe, the map. Chain of custody for my soul, if not a court. You'll sign for all of it, I said. Names. He smiled and placed his palm on the safe, and for a moment I thought the hum bent toward him like a sunflower. We will, he said. We always do. Prince's little ledger loves signatures. They took the room. That's the blunt way. They took it the way a foreman takes a crew into a flood and pulls out the parts that work and cuts off the parts that don't. They cut the trunk in the floor in a manner that didn't sever it so much as coax it into a waiting spool. The pool obligingly became less interested. They installed an assembly above the pool that looked like a baptismal font and used words like manifold and dielectric in ways that set my teeth on edge. They didn't touch the photograph. One tech paused and straightened it with two fingers like he was in someone's grandmother's living room. We stood there like hired mourners. Greg had gone very quiet. The copper under his skin, the sheen, had resolved itself into I don't know what. When he flexed his hand, the tendons stood out in low relief like lines on a map. He looked at me once, eyes his, and said, "Do not worry," in a tone that made me want to knock him down and drag him into the night. The men in suits smiled at him with that respect men give other men who have agreed to be parts in the same machine. Clipboard signed my form with a name I will not put here because I know what the internet does with names. He printed it clean and added a mobile number that, when I called it 3 days later from a Circle K payphone, connected me to a weather line in Yuma. He told me not to worry about the report. Keep it brief, he suggested. A leak at the site. You observed unknown hazardous fluids and called federal partners. Our report will match. You can sleep. I went home and didn't sleep. The penny's taste stayed in my mouth. I called my mother and listened to her talk about a neighbor's quinceanera until the tone left my walls. I put my copper jewelry, thin hoops, a bracelet from my aunt in Nogales, into a drawer like a person gives up a food that once made her sick and won't eat again because the body remembers. I washed my hands until the knuckles cracked and the little sheen didn't change and my veins remembered to be blue. Greg didn't come to work 3 days later. He left a message on the sergeant's phone that he was taking personal time. A week later, a guy in a county polo who smelled like the toner from clipboard sleeves boxed up the contents of Greg's locker and signed an employee transfer form with a rubber stamp. The stamp said a federal acronym I am not convinced exists. If you're a person who reads these words looking for the receipts, I tried. IFOI8. I got a CD with audio that sounded like rain on a shed roof and one clear second where my voice says 243 to dispatch, and then a tone the dog wouldn't stay in the room for. I made a friend in a Tucson newsroom who gave me microfiche of the Arizona Daily Star from 1904. There's a photo, the Helvetia office on its first day, a caption that says, "Superintendent Prince inaugurates the collector, a modern solution to loss at the site." The article is boosterish and eerie. It uses improve and modernize in stewardship. It has that missionary flavor men get when they talk about saving other men from themselves. I looked for obituaries. Josiah Prince drowned in a shaft in 1911, they said, while inspecting the line after heavy rains. The body was not recovered. His widow, Mary, remarried, lived to a good age. There is a school named after her in Green Valley if you want to feel sick the way I did. There is a smell in the hallway that is not pennies, but if you know pennies well enough, your tongue tells you the truth. 2 months later, the office at Helvetia was tidied. The door had a new lock. The no trespassing signs had migrated from the fences to the face of the world like freckles. Ranch hands said they heard generators sometimes at night and easy laughter that sounded like TV actors. Hikers in Box Canyon posted on Reddit about crazy minty black water running after a storm, and one guy wrote that when his girlfriend splashed her face in it, she felt awesome, and they fought all the way down the wash about whether to go to the ER. The thread got locked by moderators in under an hour. 2 days after that, a kid at Empire Ranch burned wire behind the old barn for the copper, and the fire ran on green. He said he'd never seen flame behave that politely. There's a maintenance yard off Old Spanish Trail where they park the county graders. I drive past it sometimes when my route doesn't need me to because it is good to see big machines asleep. 2 nights after Helvetia, I drove past the chain link and all 4 graders' yellow shoulders looked hunched and my hand on the wheel tingled where the glove had been. The fence picked up local radio and said, "Inventory," in static. I laughed out loud in my empty car because it's better to laugh before crying chooses you. I am not telling you this because I think I can stop anything. I am telling you so that when you smell pennies where there shouldn't be pennies and someone in a shiny truck tells you it's all under control, you will remember that control likes to call itself stewardship, and stewardship likes to be in network, and networks don't love you. They love efficiency. The hills around Tucson are full of old wire. Under Corona and Vail and Sahuarita run veins of copper so fat the earth tried to feed itself with them. Men with hopes bigger than their wives and kids and paychecks, and God hammered those veins and brought the bright snake into the daylight and laid it out across the country until everyone could hum together. The humming wants a different song now. Here are the parts one don't get to put in a report. I hear a hum in my house now. Not all the time. When the monsoon threats come from the southwest and the neighbor's swamp cooler kicks, the note in my fridge aligns with the ballast in my kitchen light, and I hear a chord I know from the room under Helvetia. Sometimes I turn off my breaker to the kitchen and the cord stays. Sometimes my phone, laid on the counter, vibrates once with no notification and the copper back. Do you know how much copper is in the back of your phone? Leaves a clean rectangle on the laminate like a handprint memory. I sleep with my bracelet in that drawer and dream of a man whose gentle face learned to be an instrument and a woman who married a feed store and learned to smile and the kind of happiness you make from what's left. In the dream, he thanks me for pulling on the wire because it taught us the measure of your refusal. Then the dream makes me wake up and I put my hand out into the dark and feel nothing but air and I cry. Quiet. So my mother won't think of me across town and decide to call. I tell rookies what I always told them. Log your gate times, keep an extra 5-gallon in the trunk, don't step on the sides of cattle guards if they've been wet because they will flip. I tell them new things now too. If you're called to a copper theft and the wire looks like it has knit itself a little, don't touch it. If a pump runs after you pull the plug, don't stand there congratulating yourself on how you pulled the plug. If a guy in a black raincoat smiles at you like he knows where your retirement lives, understand that he does, and it is not here. If a partner you trust tilts his head like a dog listening to a silent whistle, get between him and anything that hums. The ranch kid wrote me a DM a month after. I went back, he said, because of course he did. Youth is a ranch hand that treats fences like suggestions. I didn't go in, I swear, but I heard something in the fence, like singing but without words. Is that a thing? I told him foxes cry like people and barn owls screech like banshees, and that if he thinks he hears a word in a barbed wire fence, he should turn around and go home. He sent back a thumbs up and a photograph of his dog, a mutt with eyebrows that never decided what to do, and the world felt normal for 1 inch. A woman from the county called 3 weeks later. "We're closing the Helvetia files for now," she said briskly. "Put your time card on hazmat training, line item. Thank you for your service." It was a relief. It was a hand over a mouth. 2 towns south of me, a boy burned the insulation off some salvaged wire and got a rash in a neat ladder exactly where the copper lay across his bare thigh while he worked. His mother put Vicks on it and said prayers. The rash resolved into a sheen after 2 weeks, and he says he feels more electric now. He posted a video of himself rubbing a balloon on his head and sticking it to a wall with his hands 3 inches away. The comments are full of words like neat and fake. He smiles a careful smile that makes me think of clipboard. There's a place on the Empire Ranch where the irrigation pipes sing when the wind hits just so. My father liked to bring a folding chair and a beer and sit where the pipe's mouth makes a note and say this is his church because the building is enormous and free and doesn't ask for tithes. I went there last week and the pipe sang and the note had a harmony I hadn't heard in childhood. It wasn't ugly. It had that satisfaction machines have when they're given the job they were designed for. I listened until my eyes hurt with the beginning of tears, and then I laughed the laugh my mother hates and says brings bad luck, and I went home. If you ever find yourself near Helvetia on a night when the sky is green at the edges and the mesquites clap their leaves softly together like church ladies, keep driving. If you stop, because some of you are the kind of people who will stop even as you promise me you won't. Do not touch the wire that looks pretty as a bracelet. Don't follow the wet penny smell into a lit room. And if you find a pool that reflects a ceiling you can't see, keep your hands in your pockets and your mouth shut. There are men in suits who will walk in behind you and say the words that make their mothers proud. They will use the word stewardship and they will pronounce it like forgiveness. Accept that not all rescues are yours to attempt. Some of them will make you part of the room. And if you meet a man named Prince in the Meadow, tell him Elena said no. He will hum approval. He will tell you inclusion is a better word than insulation. He will be right up until the second he isn't. Then he will be a network, and the network will be fed, and the mountain will hum, and the wires in your wall will find one another in the dark and remember. This is a true story. I changed one name because I want him to have the life his mother planned, not the one the cop is singing wants. I still work nights. I still like State Route 83 when the rain smells like clean. I still bring coffee in a thermos I will never again put my mouth to without looking at the lip first for a sheen I will pretend is oil and no is not. If you ever hear a utility pole sing even when there is no wind, if your radio beeps in a tone that isn't in the manual, if a man in a black raincoat crowds your doorway and uses the verb improve like it is a saint, go home. The mountain keeps its ledgers. Men write their names in the red columns. Copper connects the lines. Some nights we are the insulation. Some nights we are the wire. And some nights, if the count is behind and you are stubborn, you hold a rope and pull and feel the world come up the line into your hand and call you efficient. Extended thinking. Hello, I'm your subscriber. My name is Sarah Montoya, but everybody in the county calls me Monty because some nickname sticks your first month and you don't get to vote. I've worked Cochise County for 12 years, Wilcox and the Sulphur Springs Valley, Karchner Caverns out toward Benson, dust-choked ranch tracks that your map app calls unnamed road, like it's being polite to a secret. If you've driven Highway 191 at night past the Wilcox Playa when the monsoon has the horizon strobing and the air smells like wet creosote and old fence posts, you've been on my shift. I know the color of floodwater under lightning. I know how a tired windmill sounds when the sucker rod starts to chatter and cattle line up in the dark like passengers for a bus that never comes. I used to think the desert was empty. Then I learned the backlands just keep their stories where it takes longer to hear them. I'm going to tell you about a string of calls we wrote up like accidents because the scene told us so, and the scene lied. I'm going to tell you about a kid I should have arrested and didn't, and what that decision made of me. I'll change a name or a road here and there, because this is still a small county, and people deserve a little mercy. 1. Buckhorn. The first one was a Sunday night in August, 2014 on my MDT, winds shifting, lightning way out over the dragoons like camera flashes from a wedding you weren't invited to. Dispatch put it out as a 10 to 54, possible livestock incident. Injured rancher, Buckhorn Ranch, 12 miles south of Kansas Settlement Road, east on a track the county grader only loves in election years. The reporting party was a neighbor who'd gone to look when the heifers bawled late. "He's in the corral," the neighbor said, voice tinny on my speaker. "Bull got him. Looks like it got him good." You develop a rhythm for rural calls. A lot of our job is negotiating between pride and the fact bodies break. I called fire out of Sunsites for medical, hit the county road with my light bar off because the sky was bright enough, took the turn where the mesquites form a gate like two old men leaning in to whisper, and followed the two rut through shin-high Saskatoon, nodding cattle stepping aside with the lazy contempt of royalty. The Buckhorn place had a ranch house that remembered paint in better years, a corrugated tank by a windmill, a row of round bales silvered by moonlight, and a corral with a jury-rigged squeeze chute that had hurt 3 men and was proud of it. In the main pen, under a light that had no lens and a bulb with fly carcasses inside like dark hail, lay Travis Buckhorn, 53. Jeans dark with wet, face in the dirt, arms awkward. One boot off, the sock ground into manure. The bull, a Cherolais cross with an attitude you could smell, stood by the far panel, blowing and stamping, foam at the mouth and a scrape on his dewlap where he'd hit wire. "Back," I told the neighbor, and widened my profile because bulls make choices based on shape and my body didn't want to be interesting. I shoved the gate with my shoulder, swung it between us and the bull, and allowed myself to breathe. I didn't need a degree to see it. Travis was gone. I felt for a carotid because hands need a task in a room like that. If you've never put your gloved fingers into a neck where life has already posted it's out of office, that is a kind of quiet you don't hear other places. The dust around his jaw had a fine spatter that didn't belong to a hoof strike. The ground where his torso lay was damp, but not pooled the way that much blood should pool in that much time. Something was off. The offness is the first key in my ear every time now. It didn't ring then the way it should have. The bull had blood on one horn and a smear across a shoulder the color of rust in well water. There were scrapes on the corral panels at chest height. The squeeze gate had a fresh bend. All of those facts told us the story we were meant to hear. Rancher gets cocky, tries to doctor the bull alone. Bull objects. Rancher pays the tuition. We had video of Travis putting himself in stupid places with livestock, FB posts, beer in hand, that ranch brag voice men use when they love an animal and hate what it can do to them. Sunsight's fire came in fast, looked, made the faces they make when they're helping me pretend, and went soft. We covered him. I walked the corral with my light low so the things the dust didn't want to tell me could shine. Something drew my eye behind his right ear, hair matted wrong, a coin of black that wasn't hoof. I parted the hair with a finger and found a dark, round wound where hoof and horn could not have made one. Small caliber, tight entrance, close. "You see that?" the neighbor asked. He was 50 going on 70, that kind of ranch lean that makes you think bones could whistle in a crosswind. He didn't come closer. He didn't need to. Bull done it. He said like a man practicing a line he'd already chosen. "Bull did something," I said. "M.E. will tell us the rest." M.E. in a county like mine is a pager and a contract doc who knows where the dirt roads don't like him. He took an hour. The storm skirted us, rain tripping just out of reach, electricity in the air that made my radio hiss even when nobody spoke. I found the boot that had spun off, toe dented like somebody stepped hard. I found a piece of hay twine broken clean and a bit of baling wire that had been coiled into a little circle and then dropped near the corner post, like a kid with restless hands had been there. I bagged both because I bag everything now. M.E. arrived with his kit and his quiet, and we took photos and measured and made the work look like science so the family later could believe in a process that wanted to keep them upright. He made a little hun noise at the lesion behind the ear and another huh at Travis's wrists, where there were faint bands of abrasion that the dust wanted to keep secret. "You see this?" I asked. He nodded, then looked at the neighbor, then at me, then at the bull that tossed his head like praise meant something. "You know how many head we have to put down on county roads because they get out?" He asked me, not because he needed to count, but because he wanted a bridge into the sentence that followed. "Folks shoot cattle with 22 because they heard their granddad did, and they shoot wrong. It's kinder than a broken hip in a wash, but only if you know where the cross is on the skull. Behind the ear if you've got a calm head and a calm hand," I said. He said, and put his gloved finger half an inch above where the bullet Saturday this one knew the cross. We wrote it accidental because the simplest story is the kind the living can carry without dropping. We wrote bull goring, contributory alcohol, scene consistent. We put the little detail in the notes. Possible secondary trauma to skull, unusual. I drove home through a smell like static and could not look at a windmill without thinking of a crosshair. 2 accidents. You don't make a pattern out of one tragedy. The second one came 6 months later, January. A cold blue sheet pulled tight over the valley, the Playa Pale Plate. ATV rollover east of Dragoon. Man pinned under a Polaris halfway into a wash. Helmet cracked. Blood dried to a rim on the gravel like someone had poured paint and then dragged a hand through it. At first glance, everything fit. Drunk, speed, wrong center of gravity. The right hand was curled into something the first responders had missed in the adrenaline wash. When I pried the fingers back, there was a piece of cloth there. Cotton, torn, with half a snap. The kind the old-timers sew on the inside of collars to hide a handcuff key. You learn tricks when you make trouble professionally. His forearms had bruises shaped like hands that weren't his. His wife had a black eye yellowing out to sickly green and a toddler who flinched at forks. We wrote it accidental because nobody was ready to name what it felt like. The third was a man found snakebit behind a pump house south of Double Adobe in May. We have rattlers that season that sound like a hard rain when they get their choir going in a spill of rock. The bite marks on his calf were real. The spatters of blood on the inside of his boot from where someone had milked the wound by cutting X's were real. The puncture under the jawline behind the left ear was also real and too small to give a scene its drama, and the snake we found in the bucket nearby had had its fangs clipped with pliers. The woman who lived in the trailer 50 yards away had a tear in her earlobe where an earring had been ripped out a decade ago, and the letter P bruised in her thigh the color of old wine from 2 months before. She kept saying she was no angel, and I kept wanting to put her angel on a bus. I started a folder. Deputies do that. We make little piles of narrative when the computer's boxes don't line up into meaning we can stand behind. I printed call summaries and clipped news clippings from the Arizona Range News because those archivists collect everything death does in our valley, down to kids who drown in irrigation laterals because they love frogs more than fences. I FOIA'd old CAD logs for domestic calls on the addresses before the accidents. I read hospital triage notes the way people read tea leaves. Contusion, clavicle, suspected rib, patient states she ran into door. The old jokes that should never have been jokes. A supervisor told me, gently, that I was getting invested. I told him, not gently, that somebody was staging stupid as cover for precise. We brought in DPS for ballistics after the 4th, an accidental discharge from a lever action. 30 to 30 in a ranch house kitchen that splattered a man's head across a calendar with a bull rider on it, and a Bible verse neatly highlighted in yellow. DPS typed the lead as 22 LR. The 30 to 30 had powder burn on the muzzle because someone had rubbed it in the splatter like a stagehand who'd done community theater twice and thought he was Broadway. The wife came to the station in a dress with little blue flowers and told us in a voice like a schoolteacher that her husband had been cleaning guns for years, and you know how he is. She had a split lip and a tattooed wedding ring. I didn't ask where the child was because her sister had him in the lobby, and her sister had shoulders like a gate. I shook the sister's hand like a prayer. Between call 4 and 5, I found the commonalities. Not the forensic ones, those you could have predicted from TV. The human ones. Men who were local legends for their rodeo days and local nightmares for the way they grew small in their chairs when they were drunk and their kids got loud. Old protective orders folded into glove boxes because paper makes him matter. Holes punched beside door frames where a fist had missed on purpose. A bruise pattern that looks like a man with a ring grabbed a woman by the upper arm to steer her somewhere she didn't want to go. Children answering doors with the flat effect of kids who count bottles by label color. And at each one, a neatness that was not this county's style. Coiled baling wire by the corner. A TV on, but the volume at 0. A porch light unscrewed 2 turns instead of 3. A washed coffee mug sitting upside down on the drain board like a punctuation mark. I don't want to make a romance out of it. Those are the tiny things your body reads and doesn't tell your head. My head started keeping a list. The 5th was the first time I saw him. 3. Sightline. It was late July, the month the sky has opinions about your plans. We got a 10 to 16, domestic, Out by a place we all knew, but I won't name because she is still alive and I respect secrecy as a survival technique. Her teenage daughter called with a whisper that broke into static when she breathed because she was hiding in a closet and the cell tower in town did what it could. I got there with another deputy in 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours, lights off a mile out, because in ranch country, you don't make yourself a story if you don't have to. We could hear him from the drive. A man doing that long planes of voice yelling sound that carries over fences and tells coyotes which houses meet. The front door was ajar and the kitchen light was on, and you could smell whiskey in the yard. There was blood on the porch, not much. Her dog made the sound of a dog that has been taught that sound is dangerous. We stacked and went in and did the domestic dance every cop knows. Names, hands, split the room, isolate. But the room did not contain the man. The yard did. He had stomped out back toward the barn because men like that always stomp out toward the nearest thing they know how to control. The barn door was open and the fluorescent flickered in strips like lightning's little cousin. I could hear the windmill's steady hiccup and the tank sloshing with cattle breath on it. 2 kids were in the alley between the barn and a line of pipe panels. The girl had a phone. The boy had a face like a coyote that has learned fences in the last 2 months. He lifted his chin at me, a half inch, and then moved that chin to the north 40, and I understood as clearly as if he had written it. There. The man, call him Joe, was in the calf pen, one boot on the lowest rail, a revolver in his right hand, and a monologue about men and obeying and how the county wasn't going to tell him about my house. The woman stood 5 feet from him, arms curled around her torso like she was keeping the pieces from falling. Her left cheek had a handprint in it the size of a glove. Sometimes I wish I didn't have a sister. Joe, I said polite, put the gun down and help me not screw up the report. It's a line that works on men who care about what other men think of their file. He turned, saw me, smiled a small smile that told me he had decided which version of himself he was giving me. Then the smile went because something else moved his eyes. He looked past me toward the back corner of the property where an old mesquite grew up through a tangle of dead cholla, like a man wearing a bad coat. He squinted. Who the hell? I heard it then. Not a bang. A pop with manners. 22 suppressed has a voice like someone closing a padded door down the hall. Joe's head jerked like a puppet. The hole tapped him behind and below the ear. That small black coin in the place I already knew was a cross if you were firm and close. He didn't fall forward the way people who haven't seen this think people fall. He slid down the rail like someone had pulled the floor out from under his words. He didn't drop the revolver because men like Joe will not drop the thing that made them believe they were the biggest animal in the pen. His hand opened where it should have closed, and the revolver fell and landed grip first in the manure like a gavel. There was no second shot. There didn't need to be. My partner, who I love like a cousin I argue with at Thanksgiving, took the woman and kids into the kitchen with her voice soothing like she was stirring stew. I went toward the corner fence at a trot that slowed on its own because something in that corner didn't want me galloping. You know the dark shape a teenager makes when he's been living outdoors all summer, the long bones showing. The shirt 2 sizes ago, the hat bill flattened under hands that need something to do, the jaw set like a gate latch. He stood on the other side of a T-post line where our jurisdiction and his sense of moral math made a Venn diagram for 3 seconds. He had a .22 with a tube magazine, an old Ruger that looked like it had been cleaned by love and wiped down by habit. It wore a can on the end that wasn't store-bought. I swear I could smell cutting oil and brake cleaner like a garage had made the kin a favor for a cousin. He didn't run. He did something that made me want to go back to patrol school and relearn the way we teach eyes to read. He tipped his hat with his offhand, a half inch, like men did to my grandmother when she was my age and Arizona had less of everything but land. He wore a square-knotted friendship bracelet someone else's kid would have on. He had a little blood dotted on his shirt like you get when you cut your palm with baling wire and then wipe it on yourself because you love evidence too little and blood too much. Stop, I said, and my hand found my holster. It didn't find the snap. I'm stopped, he said. He sounded 14, 17, 20. A voice like the county, and that's not me being poetic. It had gravel and apology in it. He wasn't going to stop. I looked at his eyes because people teach you eyes never lie. His did a thing I've only seen a dozen times, and every time it's been in a person whose life had been surrounded by men with keys. They looked at me, they looked through me, and then they looked over my shoulder as if counting. They weren't empty. They were applied. You can put it down, I said. He shook his head once. No, ma'am. If I put it down, you will make it into something it isn't. What is it? A tool, he said. He said it the way a farrier says rasp. Sirens came on the county road. Our backup making time through cotton fields that had nothing to do with what we were doing. He heard them, and the faintest smile touched his mouth like he had been reassured of something. He took a step back into the mesquite's shadow, and our Venn diagram ended with the fence. I've chased people. I didn't. He vanished between two catclaw bushes I would not have chosen for a doorway because I like my face. He did it without catching hat or shirt, and the creatures that live in catclaw made no sound. I have listened since to try to teach myself how he moved. I still don't have the track. We wrote that one justifiable because it was. Nobody in that kitchen wanted me to make it into anything else. The wife gave a statement with shaking hands that said she had been pleading with him to put the gun away, that he had pointed it at the ceiling, that he had laughed in a way that made the kids cry, that she didn't see the shooter, that she didn't care. My partner gave her a blank card with a number on it, and a lipstick mark on the back, and a look that said she would move heaven and closets to find room for her if she needed it. I took the .22 brass I found nose-deep in dirt 50 yards from the catclaw, one fragmentary, old, bagged it, and told myself I was keeping trash. For a ledger. Patterns hardened. The county shifted. Ranch wives talked to each other in the frozen aisle, a quiet trade. The feed store put our lethality assessment forms, lap, by the register in a brochure holder that had once held a flyer for a calf roping. I began to spend my days off in file rooms that smell like old pencils, reading domestic calls from the 90s and saying whom to myself, until clerks gave me back the look my mother gives me when I go back to a man I've already broken up with twice. A name surfaced like a bullet in wet sand. Rowdy Pike. The Pike place had been a brand on a century-old map before the drought and bank did their duet. The family scattered. The father, Wayne, had a DV history that made me want to punch doors. The mother, Raina, died in a rollover on a chalky road near Fort Grant when her youngest was 8. There were 3 kids, 2 girls who married out and left, and a boy whose school checked him present more than he was because ranch kids ride the edges of truancy like cowboys ride fences. The boy's name was Rowan. Rowan, you say it, you want to be gentle. He'd have been 16 when Travis Buckhorn caught a coin of darkness under his ear. He'd have been 17 when the ATV found the wash at just the right angle for a skull to meet rock. A school resource officer wrote a note in 2017 about a kid named Rowan who came to school in January in a shirt with short sleeves and a bruise armband where blood pulls. Parents refused interview. A neighbor wrote a Facebook post in 2019 that said, "Anyone know where the Pike boy went?" A teacher wrote a grant application for rural attendance improvement with a line about a boy who was good with his hands, quiet, sits with the kids who are loud and they get quiet. There was a county clinic note from 2020. Lacerations. Fell on wire. Child refused to remove hat. And the doctor wrote nothing in the place where the form asked what else he saw. That nothing made me want to go to his house and put his license in my pocket and tell him he could have it back when he learned to use it like a spine. You can't arrest a pattern. You can't protect a ghost. I kept the folder in my bottom drawer with the latch that sticks. When it was quiet, I'd take it out and read it, and then I'd put it back and lock the drawer like a person keeping liquor in the house with a promise to herself. 5. Sting. We set up a thing that wasn't a sting because stings get approved and get names and get a memo. This got me and my partner and a ranger out of Coronado National Forest sitting in a stock trailer behind a barn 2 miles from the Buckhorn place in a heat so thick it felt like someone left an oven door open. We had word from a neighbor who wouldn't call it a tip because he didn't want to be a snitch that a man with the right kind of swagger had been throwing bottles at the stock, and the wife had been to the clinic twice in a month. We asked her if she wanted help. She made the face women make when they know help can look like punishment. She said no. We told her if she needed us to come inside, she should turn the porch light on and leave the door unlatched, and we'd treat it like a welfare check. She nodded like a person who's learned too many secret handshakes and walked back into her own house the way a soldier walks back into a room he left alive by luck the first time. Rowan had 2 tells we'd learned from the brass and from how the scenes felt afterward. He liked windmill houses because they hit a shooter, and he liked storms because thunder masks a lot. The radio said monsoon storms would ring the valley between 9 and midnight. We waited in the stock trailer and listened to cattle tear grass with their teeth, and my partner chewed sunflower seeds like she had a grievance with them. A mosquito found my ankle and made my leg itch like it had been cursed. I thought about the math that would live in my bones if I was right, that I had put myself between a boy and the story he was trying to write in blood. At 21:14, the porch light came on. 2 turns. We didn't coordinate like SWAT because we weren't supposed to be there. We moved like women who have lived in this valley and know where dirt gives suddenly. My partner went to the kitchen corner where a window has a blind spot most men forget and most women don't. The ranger covered the back door because he grew up near Sonoyta and understands how men sit with their backs. I went to the windmill house because I live with a tally of sound that makes me brave where I should be careful. The pump house was concrete block, the door swollen on its hinges from years of monsoon swell. It had a crooked padlock that had been cut once and re-hung with ceremony. I put my shoulder to it and felt the whole structure give a little like it had been worrying about a storm and was glad to let somebody else make decisions. Inside smelled like oil and onions. Old oil and someone's lunch from a week they were too poor for a lunchbox. I stood the way an animal stands when it knows a snake is near. High, still, listening through my teeth. What I heard was the smallest iterative sound, the way metal makes a question when a hand settles on it. Not a slide. The nose of a rifle moving a fraction on concrete. If you don't live here, you won't have that sound in your vocabulary. If you live here, you can name it and your bloodstream does things it learned from your grandmother's grandmother. Rowan, I said, and felt dumb immediately because if it wasn't him, I had just given a different kind of trouble my best guess. It's Monty. Set it down. The pause that came had a human shape. He breathed once, and the 22 I couldn't yet see made a polite small sound on concrete as it settled. He didn't move toward it or away from it. I had the absurd thought that we were both seeing if the other person wanted their shape that night. How'd you know? He asked, voice behind a cinder block pillar, soft enough that the pump's click could have been a word too. You leave things tidy, I said. Men like Travis weren't tidy. Your staging tries to be their pride, and it isn't. You know where the cross is. You've been around animals when it was time to end things. He was quiet a long time. He was going to kill her, he said, and he said it not as justification, but like weather. I know, I said, and my voice came out of my mouth wrong, because cops are supposed to say, I don't know to everything until a judge says yes. If you're done, be done. You stop. He had a boy, he said. The boy was watching. Then you stop, I said again, and stepped into the line where our shadows blended and the world turned into a picture a person could shoot if they weren't scared. My hand was open. I've held out my open hand to dogs and kids and women and drunks with a screwdriver and to 3 men with rifles if you count this. I don't know why I do it. The Academy says show empty hands to make nervous people less nervous. I think I do it because my mother taught me to show the world the hand I wanted it to hold. He shifted like a coyote coming to the edge of brush to see if the rabbit is still foolish. He was younger than I wanted him to be. He had a look on his face I recognized from the mirror in my own bathroom at 2:45. He wore no jewelry. He had no tattoos. There was a little smudge of oil under his thumbnail. His mouth had that little white line on the inside of the lower lip you get when you chew it, and you learned as a kid to keep your mouth quiet with your teeth. He looked at my hand as if it had a bullet in it. He took the rifle by the magazine tube, not the stock, and balanced it on his palm and held it out a half-inch like we were going to trade, and when I didn't take it he smiled like a person who has to change keys in a song. He started in the wrong register. He turned and set it on the floor instead. The can at the muzzle had been wrapped with bicycle inner tube like a boy who likes YouTube a lot. He had cut it clean. You can't keep doing this, I said. He nodded once. I don't have to, he said. I think I got all of them here. All. The dumb word for what you think your list is when you're young enough to think lists end. Here, I said. Do not make me find out about you in Wilcox or Douglas or Safford. Do not make me read your name in Graham County paper and explain to my sergeant and the county attorney why I didn't put you in cuffs when I had you in a room with 4 walls and 1 door. He looked like I'd told him the creek had moved. I don't want to be famous, he said. I'd like to be good. You don't get that from a rifle, I said, and the sentence came out like a sermon. He looked at me, and I wanted to slap my own mouth. The storm came then, hard. A sheet of rain slammed the pump house roof, so that for a second I could have shouted into his face and not heard myself. The light stuttered and went out and came back, and the pump hiccuped once and stopped completely, so the quiet settled in thick. He picked up the rifle, and I took a breath because I am trained to measure distances in breaths, and he didn't lift it. He turned and set it in the corner behind the pressure tank where nobody would look unless they were cleaning like a mother-in-law. He took 2 steps past me into the doorway and let the rain hit his hat and his shirt and his face, and then he stepped into it like a man stepping off a bus into a city he knows only from a paper map. And he walked into the dark between the windmill and the mesquites and vanished like a deer that knows where fence wire has been spliced and where it hasn't. I could have followed. I didn't. There was no shot on the porch that night. The man in that house went to jail for terroristic threats and dangerousness, and a list our county attorney reads like he's writing ingredients on a card he hates. The woman made a bag in the morning, and his sister put her in a car, and someone handed me a folded piece of paper with a number on it and a note that said safe. And I put the paper in my uniform shirt pocket and thought I could feel the heat through the fabric. 6 cost. There's a dumb story people tell about women in this job, that we get too close. It's also the only way anything gets done for people who don't hire lawyers when they're hurt. I got close. I made quiet deals with rangers who know how to stand very still, and with a nurse at the ER who would text me she's here when a woman asked her to. I did civil standbys at trailers at weird hours and stood when men who thought volume was law tried to make it into one. I sat with a 12-year-old on a step while she fed a bottle lamb because the ewe had died and her father had hit her mother with a flashlight and told her to stop crying, and I told her she didn't have to. And then she did, and we both did, and then she showed me the lamb's ear tag, and we said the number out loud because numbers are reliable, and this place does trust that. From that night at the pump house until I write this, I haven't worked a staged accident in Sulphur Springs Valley. 2 popped up in Santa Cruz County that their detectives wrote as ATV rollovers until DPS ballistics raised an eyebrow, and one up in Greenlee everybody swore was a toxic snake bite gone wrong. I do not know where Rowan went. When you choose not to arrest someone, you don't get a tracking number. I got 2 things in the mail in the next 2 years from no place at all. No return addresses, stamps put on like a kid learning placement. Each envelope had a single thing, a coiled loop of baling wire cut neat, a porch light bulb and a tissue, unscrewed 2 turns. Someone inside the station thought it was a threat. It didn't feel like one. It felt like a list he'd handed me back. I'm done. See, I kept those items in a drawer under my socks because I don't know what to do with objects that make me a participant. I FOIA'd my own calls because I wanted to hurt myself and because I wanted to catch where the audio changed. The CD I got for the pump house night was 5 minutes shorter than it should have been, with a burst of noise at the moment the rain took the roof. That burst, when you turn it up to a volume that makes dogs leave the room, contains one word in a voice that is mine thrown back at me. Stop. I have the discipline to pretend that's a radio artifact. I do not have the discipline to fully believe it. I got called into the captain's office a month after the pump house. He closed the door and asked me, kindly, if I was sleeping. I told him yes. I told him I loved my job. I told him nothing about boys who walk into rain like rain can wipe your name off a ledger. He told me I was getting too many victims to remember by first name, which is how men who don't know how else to tell you they care tell you the thing their own bodies won't let them say. He offered me days. I said no because nights still feel like the hours the valley's temperature allows truth. 7. What I carry now. I carry a stack of cards in my vest with a number on it women can call where there is always a person, not a recording. I put one in the feed store by the register when the posters slip. I have a habit now. When I go to a ranch house and the porch light is unscrewed 2 turns, I will tighten it 1, and I will step back, and I will look at the woman and not at the man, and I will say in a tone that fits inside a grocery list, if you need us, say you're out of dog food. We have 3 deputies who know that code, and a dispatcher who knows my voice when I am trying to be glass and am clay. I patched a windmill sucker rod with a rancher south of Pierce because it was either that or wait 3 hours for a guy with a wrench, and there were cows thirsty. And we stood in the pump house shoulder to shoulder, and I smelled onions on the shelf, and we were quiet in a way that let both of us be men for a second without pretending. And afterwards he said, "You hear about the boy?" And I said, "What boy?" And he said, "The one who put down bulls." And I said, "I hear things." And he said, "Well," the way men say well when they know they shouldn't say more. He handed me a folded dollar bill to buy something cold, and I gave it to a kid at a gas station because cold is for kids and not for me anymore. There's a Ranch Wives group on Facebook where they trade recipes and warnings and the kind of jokes that keep you from breaking dishes. In January, someone posted a screenshot of a Craigslist ad for a kid with hands, knows fences, quiet, has own rig, and the comments were fast and gentle, and then the post was gone. One comment stayed in my head. Good fences make hard journeys easier. I don't think the woman who wrote it had read poetry. I still drive the Buckhorn turnoff. The bull that gored Travis had to be put down. The neighbor wept like a man whose friend did a thing he didn't want to do, and now no one will be mad at him for. The new owners painted the ranch house a color that won't stop the sun and planted 2 trees that won't love this soil. The corrugated tank by the windmill is the same. My hand still goes out like a fool to touch the pump house door every time, and every time I don't. On nights when the monsoon stacks over the valley and the lightning is so far you could believe the desert is a planetarium, I pull off on a 2-rut and roll my windows down and turn the radio off and listen for a small polite pop I will not hear. My dog, Duke, puts his head on my knee and sighs like the part of the world in charge of air forgot and then remembered. I think about Rowan in a town I will not find. A man now if he got to be one, eating gas station food, sleeping by arroyos, walking into service bays and asking for odd jobs, washing his hands at outdoor sinks until they stink like industrial soap and onion, and keeping a ledger his own way with a pencil he sharpens with a knife. 8. The part one have to say out loud. I did not do a heroic thing. I did the thing my body demanded when it met the kind of quiet you hear in backlands where people die ugly and we make it pretty on paper. Maybe I should have put him on the hood of my unit and booked him and let the county do what it does with boys who are earnest and wrong. I do not think the county would have done a thing that felt like justice to anyone alive. I know there are men who will read this who will put me on their private lists of women who are soft or political. I have lifted dead men out of cattle guards with my hands in their armpits while their bodies made sounds on the metal they didn't know how to stop making. I have put cuffs on women I love because they swung on men I hate, and the law says what it says about assault. I'm not asking for belief. I'm tying my own little wire loop around the truth and setting it by the post so I can find my way back when the night lies. If you live out here and you hear yelling after midnight that turns into talking that is not words but is older than words, call. If you see a porch light unscrewed 2 turns, pretend you forgot something and go home and call from the road. If you are a woman who thinks she'll take one more hit and then leave before that hit. If you have a boy who wants to be good with his hands, put him with a man who says please to wind and thank you to fence and doesn't keep ledgers on other people's breath. If you are a deputy reading this on your day off because someone sent it to you and told you you'd like the vibe, here's the part they don't teach. Scenes lie. Staging can be humility, and it can be contempt, and it can be a kid painting a room the color he thinks the world wants to see. Watch for 2-turn porch lights. Watch for coiled wire left in places wires shouldn't be. Watch how neat the coffee cup is on the drain board. And when you find the black coin behind the ear that tells you where the cross is, stand still for a second and breathe and understand you are in a room that keeps its own books and you are only the auditor tonight. I still work nights. I keep my hair shorter than I like because wind. I sharpen pencils in the file room because I like the sound. I drink coffee from a thermos that tastes like metal no matter how much I scrub it, and it reminds me that things carry what they touch. I think about a boy who tipped his hat because he was raised to. I think about the soft pop of a decision. On my fridge there's a magnet from Karchner Caverns that says, "The beauty is underground." And sometimes I want to throw it away because it's a lie. And sometimes I leave it there because I need a thing in my kitchen that is trying to tell me something about patience. The Backlands keep their own vigil. We write one kind of story on our forms and another kind on ourselves. If you ever find yourself turning off a county road at night toward a ranch where the windmill complains and the porch light is out and the air has that hot iron smell of a storm not here yet, keep driving. And if you do not keep driving, if you step into a yard where voices live like knives, be ready to see a neatness you don't trust and a mercy you don't get to claim. Dear Soul Abyss, my name is Luis Armenta, Lou on the radio. I've worn a Cochise County badge 10 years, most of them at night. If you drive east of Douglas toward the Peninsulas and you catch yourself counting the washes out loud because the dark is too big to carry without a beat, those are my hours. My beat runs from the farm-to-market roads that crisscross dust like stitching, up past Rucker and Tex Canyon, over to Portal where the sky fills with birders in March, and down again to the slot of Skeleton Canyon on the line. I used to love the sound a mesquite gate makes when you swing it open, hinge groaning, wire twanging, the little ping as the post settles. It meant serviceable things, trespass, a neighbor squabble, a mule stuck in a stock tank. It doesn't mean those things anymore, not for me. If you've never worked night shift along the border, picture a black ocean whose shore is Cholia and Ocotillo. There's a smell you only get when the monsoon has dirt on its mind. Wet creosote and caliche like cold clay rubbed in your teeth. There are sounds, Bob White calling, turbines from the wind farm far to the north when the air is right, coyotes yipping with laughter that isn't joyful so much as efficient. Then there are the government sounds. Border Patrol Tahoe tires on gravel, rotor wash from an EC-120 when somebody on the ridge pops a flare, the soft snap of a seismic sensor tripping in a wash, and sending a text to a duty phone on a desk I can find in the dark with my eyes closed. We all pretend we get used to the sensors. We don't. USBP has a yard full of $50 coffee cans with lids that screw down and antennas that look like grass. They call them UGS, unattended ground sensors, but the old-timers call them Z-cans, like they're talking about a cartoon. You bury them so that only the whiskers stick up, and when a person or a truck crosses, they send a petulant little ping to a repeater somewhere between Mule and Chiricahua. Some nights the pings make a steady metronome, the kind of night the Tucson sector duty captain calls business as usual. Some nights the pings stop, and that's worse. The call that started this came in at 1:37 on a Tuesday in late August, the kind of night when heat hangs around like a conversation you wish you'd walked away from sooner. It was dispatch at first, 247, check with BP on a sensor hit south of Skeleton, and then it was Border Patrol directly, because we talk in real time when maps and flash floods and whatever else don't care about jurisdiction. County 247, be advised we've got a cluster strike on K13 Skeleton Wash. Tower is glitchy, our VSS is throwing snow. Could be a pack mule train, could be horses. Station spun up a unit from rodeo. Are you close? I was, because I'd been sitting at the McNeil gas station watching lightning lean on the San Benitos like elbows and telling myself the power wouldn't go out before I paid for coffee. My partner that night, Hargrove, 2 years in, tough, less impressed than most by my long stories, was riding with Agent Torres, 4-star medic, because that's how we do it when the canyons are the destination. You bring the person who knows how to breathe for you when rock tries to fix your ribs into furniture. Skeleton Canyon is a crease in the Peninsulas where history likes to sit and pick its teeth. Geronimo surrendered there once. A century later, some men ran guns and cattle through it like it was a private hallway. It funnels sound in ways that make you hear your own blood. The turnoff comes up plain if you know where to look and not at all if you don't. We rolled in without lights. Radios turned down so we could hear the honest noises first. Our VSS down is weird, Hargrove said, watching her handheld. Those cameras run on the kind of power that keeps hospitals alive in a war. Towers on the other ridge, Torres said, steady in that Borstar way. Lightning's been topping off the air with nonsense all week. By the second cattle guard, the temperature dipped 6 degrees like we'd stepped into a taller room. I felt it on my forearms. The smell of wet rock came off the wash in a way that made me think of a school gym after a flood, clean and sour at once. My MDT timestamped us at 2:09 entering the canyon. The stars above the slot were bright enough to make you think light is loyal. We parked off the 2-track, behind a low rise, noses east. Habit. Point your exit where the sun would be if the sun cared. County 247's on scene. I whispered into the mic, no eyes yet. Static gave me back the shape of my own voice, then a bright clean copy from BP's Douglas station, and then a smear of something under the word like a second voice humming. I used to make fun of guys who swore radios get opinions. I don't anymore. We moved on foot. You can hear shoes in caliche from 30 yards. The trick is to make the scuff sound like night. The wash bottom was damp, sand toughened up by last week's storm. The first impression came easy. 6, maybe 8 sets of feet, adult stride, moving north, up canyon. One pair heavier, a mule or a man carrying something that made gravity a suggestion. The prints had the neatness of men who know how to walk in the desert without writing novels for trackers to read. Cold, Hargrove said under her breath. She touched her forearm and made a face. Like AC just kicked on. The wind wasn't moving. The Ocotillo stood up straight like old men at a funeral. The cold came anyway. It smelled faintly of rain, and this is going to sound like I'm trying too hard. Ocean. Not seaweed. Not rotting sea. That neutral salt the inside of a shell has when you put it to your ear as a kid and tell a cousin you can hear waves. At the S-curve where the canyon narrows, the sensor line goes bananas on good nights. The ground there has a vein of tiny stones that carry weight like a gossip. Everything you do gets repeated. That night, the Z-cans weren't pinging at all. I glanced at my watch to get a normal number into my head. 2:22. When I looked up again, the glow from our tritium vial on the compass didn't seem to be glowing. It seemed to be arguing with the dark. Movement, Torres said softly, pointing with 2 fingers. A dark shape at the base of a cat claw, low, human. We approached cautiously, guns down, because the most dangerous thing out here most nights is a person who believes we are about to make them disappear. Sheriff's office, I said, and Border Patrol, Torres added, efficient. The shape flinched, then collapsed back in as if to say not yet. When I got close enough to touch, I saw a man in his mid-30s, black hair shaved to stubble, a scar like a comma on his right cheek. His left eye had that pink rim you get after 3 days without decent water. His hands were raw with mesquite thorns. He was a coyote, the human kind, no question. You can smell the job on them. Cheap cologne, diesel, dust, smoke, fear, arrogance, all stacked like bad plywood. No tenemos intention de lastimar, I said, and switched to the Spanish I learned from my mother and men who only tell you the truth in the second half of the sentence. Hands. Up. He raised them and I realized he wasn't hiding from us. He was hiding from the canyon. Lo abrí, he whispered hoarsely. Abrí la puerta. No quería, pero. I didn't know the rest because his voice did that street trick where it only tells you consonants and expects you to fill in vowels. You open what? La puerta donde? Ella. He twitched his chin up canyon, and even that small motion made him wince like the night had a long hand on his skin. Con la cosa. La piedra. El dormido. He shivered so hard his teeth clicked. No quería, he whispered again. Pero estaba. He fumbled for a word. Hambra. Torres and I traded the look professionals trade when a scene turns from normal to vocabulary we've never used. You're bleeding, Torres said in English, crouching. He wasn't. His shirt was torn, yes, and one sleeve stuck to his arm where sweat had dried. But there was no blood. The dark marks on his shirt were wet and black and didn't glisten like blood. They glowed a hint in our green light and made my mouth taste like I'd licked a 9-volt. When Torres touched one, he pulled his hand back and said, very calmly, don't touch that. We had a choice. Cuff and drag him out to the unit, call it a night, or walk the direction his chin had pointed and do the work we all pretend we're not addicted to. I don't know if we chose. The canyon chose for us. The wind that wasn't there before moved, but not down canyon. Up, like air being drawn towards something that had opinions. The coyote clutched my sleeve with sudden strength. His fingers were cold, and the cold wasn't the weather. It lived inside his hands like a power. No digas el nombre, he hissed. No lo lames. El te escucha. El dormido, Torres said, because medics are calm and brave and sometimes too rational to be scared of poetry. The coyote whimpered and shoved his face into the sand like a child. The first sound came then, a wet flapping, the way a bat sounds when it gets inside a gym and can't find the open door, scaled up to something larger than bats should be. It came from ahead, from the slot where the canyon walls come close enough for men to shake hands across the gap. My scalp prickled. The radio gave a soft burst that sounded almost like a word, and then went flat as if somebody had pressed a hand gently over its mouth. None of our Z-cans are pinging, Hargrove said. She was kneeling over the coyote, exacting with her gloves, eyes on his hands like they could tell her the weather. It's like they're polite now, or asleep. We moved. The canyon floor there is carved into natural steps. The rock has the look of something that remembers water so well it can carve its face to welcome it back. The prints we'd been following drifted left toward a shadow that should have been a boulder and wasn't. It was an opening where there hadn't been an opening last monsoon. I know that because I put my hand on the wall there in May and told Hargrove there were pinion mouse tracks, and she said nobody likes pinion mice, Lou. The hole led into a chamber cut by geology and finished by something else. Edges too regular, corners too unrock. The cold grew stubborn. It wasn't the air temperature. It was interior. The place under my sternum where Fear File's paperwork filled. Inside, light behaved like water in a bowl, sloshing slow when we moved. That is the best way I can say it without lying. Torres' headlamp didn't throw a cone. It pushed a suggestion. The floor, even where dry, looked slick, a glass sheen over rust-red rock. On the walls were lines. No paint, no glyph, just a rubbing, thin, like someone had run a piece of charcoal in parallel slashes until the room had 5 tall staff lines like sheet music. In the gaps between the lines, something moved very slowly. Not an animal, not wind. The movement had the patience of sap. Hargrove stopped first because that's who she is. "Do you hear that?" she asked softly. I did. It sounded like breath. Not from a mouth. Not lungs. Breath the way a big ship sounds when you're in the engine room and a piston strokes and you think, if it misses one beat, we die? USBP 31 to County 247. My shoulder mic said in a bright, too far away voice. "You still in service?" It sounded like someone calling us from a tunnel a half-mile long with the understanding we might not find the way out in time. 247, copied, I said, and my voice came back in the same bright from far place. If you've never had your radio betray the distance between you and the person who could help, I hope you never do. We found them 10 yards in. 6 at first, then 4 more. A group of migrants and 2 agents, all standing or half standing or held standing, webbed to the wall by a slick that was not slick and bands that were not vines. Their eyes were open. Their mouths too. Their chests didn't move right. I know how to read the human chest. It's a machine with good, honest mechanics. These chests moved with a timing that matched the piston breath of the room, like they were borrowing somebody else's metronome. When my light crossed the bands, they twitched, not from us, from the light's heat. The bands weren't alive, not in the snake way. They were alive in the way a fungus is alive. Their surface shone with the black what that had stained the coyote's shirt. It smoked a thin white where the lamp's beam played across it, like breath on a winter day. "Help," one of the migrants said. He said it politely, like asking for a glass of water in a stranger's kitchen. His lips were coated with the black, and where the black touched his gums, they looked clean. That detail fetched a thought from the back shelf in my head and showed it to my eyes. This thing that was not a plant and not a machine was washing them. Washing out blood, washing out all the noise of being human. The thought made me gag around the inside of my throat. "Don't touch the bands," Torres said, and that's the moment I knew we were already late. He had done the math the way medics do. He had seen something alive behave wrong and matched it to a problem he couldn't fix with oxygen and trauma shears. From deeper in the room came a sound. Not the piston breath. This was water going down a drain in a house where the pipes are older than your grandfather, a long gluck that ends in a swallow. The migrants jolted, in sync, like a wave moved through them. One of the agents, Glenn, I found out later, groaned like a man waking from dental work. The other, shorter, a woman I've waved at on 191 100 times, opened her eyes a little more and said, very slowly, "Don't wake it." "What is it?" Hargrove asked. She sounded angry at the question for existing. She gets that way when she's scared. The coyote behind us started to laugh softly. It was almost beautiful, the laugh. He wasn't mocking. He had remembered a joke nobody wants to hear. "Y esto antes," he said. "De cuando no había la línea." "Cuando?" He groped for the word and gave up. "El dormido." I hate it when stories demand a word. I hate it more when the canyon demands one. I said it because sometimes saying things out loud breaks the spell or kills you faster. The sleeper. The room breathed in. All of them moved with it, the banded ones. In the wall far ahead, under a lip of rock, something that did not look like anything your brain has a box for lifted a little, like a muscle. I'm calling it that because I don't know what else to call a thing that flexes when your light hits it and leaves behind, in your head, a picture of something big rolling over in its bed and putting a hand out to find the person who said its name. "You said the word," Torres said calmly. "Let's pretend you didn't." We tried to cut them out. I say that so you don't think we stood there narrating. Hargrove took her knife and went for the band at the woman agent's wrist. The second the steel touched the sheen, the black ran up the blade like a spill traveling back into a container. It climbed to the hilt and made a little wet finger on Hargrove's glove. She starfished her hand and shook, and it let go without argument, then retreated down the blade and back into the band, as if a supervisor had told it to stop showing off. The woman's wrist tightened involuntarily. Some pulse moved under her skin. Wrong. She said, "Don't," and meant it in a way that wasn't fear of pain. It was like she was asking us not to touch an organ we could not name. "Cut here," Torres said instead, and put his shears not near the band but into the jacket at the shoulder. He peeled the jacket back in practiced swaths, exposing skin that was cold without being cool to the touch, dry without being dry. Where the band touched, it had left a bruise that wasn't color so much as an absence. He put an oxygen cannula under her nose because medics are loyal to their tricks, and the tube sat there and did nothing in a way that broke my heart. You can't be brave for long if the room disagrees with bravery. Your body saves you by making you practical. Practical is hands moving and radio talking. I keyed up and heard myself say, 247 to any unit. We have multiple 11 to 44 in process. Unknown hazard. Underground. Request full ISS. Air asset. Hazmat. SAR. Anybody with suits and tape. The radio clicked and then replied in a man's voice I didn't know, Midwestern soft. Stand by, Cochise. Hold your position. We didn't call you, I said, stupid and angry, because when an unfamiliar voice knows your canyon and your call sign, you want to spit. You did, the voice said mildly. Just not in a way your radio would be proud to write down. Help is en route. Do not stimulate the site. What is this? Hargrove asked the air. Who are you? Utilities, the voice said, and if you hear me laugh when I write that, forgive me. It comes from a place with no humor. Of last resort. The coyote behind us giggled again, then sobbed once like a little kid who has realized the game made the grown-ups mad. Abrí la puerta. He whispered again to nobody we could help. Yo solito. The room breathed in. The bands tightened a fraction. The black shifted like muscle around the migrants' bodies and the agents' arms. Under the lip, the knot muscle slid, and in its wake the rock looked polished the way a stone looks polished in a pocket after a month. Lighted that bowl slosh. The cold pressed behind my eyes, and when I blinked, I saw a little afterimage of the breath in negative. Dark when my lids were down, too bright when up. People have died in this county in embarrassingly simple ways because they fell off rock and broke their heads. This, what we were looking at, was a more complicated embarrassment. It felt ancient. It felt like a maintenance problem. Back out, Torres said, sudden, decisive. Now. He doesn't raise his voice unless it's the only tool left. We need head count on the mouth. We need to stage medical at the trucks. We need to call this cave a patient and treat it like one. We moved. The migrants watched us with the courtesy of people at a bus stop who accept the bus isn't for them. The woman agent's eyes tracked me. She mouthed a word. I think it was run. Outside, the canyon had collected weather. A sheath of cloud had pulled over the slot and lay there with intent. The Ocotillo that had stood straight an hour before leaned a degree like a congregation finding them. Far down canyon, lights bobbed, BP units, whoever utilities had sent. One of our deputies who would later give me a long look and ask me if I was okay, and I would tell him too much and not enough. My watch said 2:22. It had said 2:22 when we went in. I don't need a science of it. I need to tell you the number stuck long enough for me to memorize it against the rest of my life. You know Incident Command, the pop-up tent, the 205 forms, the radios arranged by frequency like a man would arrange his socket set if a woman who loved him told him she wanted him to feel proud. It was that, but accelerated, like it had been poured from a bucket into the canyon. A perimeter went up. A hazmat tape line blossomed. A man in a green uniform I didn't recognize, no insignia, hair high and tight, stepped out of a Suburban that had no plates and smiled at me like he had been waiting for me to arrive at a party. Deputy Armenta, he said. He didn't look at his clipboard to know my name. You'll anchor north. 4-star anchors south. Nobody goes back in without our suits on. Understood? Who's we? Hargrove asked, pushing past polite. Her eyes were bright the way her eyes get when she reads a cliff and doesn't like the book. He smiled again with an apology built in. "Night utilities," he said. "Agency of last resort." He stuck out a hand like we were at a county fair. "Call me Mason." I didn't take the hand. Not to be rude, because the last thing I wanted was to exchange any current with whatever had touched his skin. He took the flinch and tucked it into his pocket like a favor. "We're going to take care of this," he said simply. "You've done your part." The canyon forgot to let me be angry. It became busy. Guys in suits that make people think of space stepped in pairs into a place that didn't want them. They carried equipment that looked like ladders arranged wrong with little plates on the side that hummed in my teeth. A woman with no insignia and a Borstar harness climbed a wall I've watched Rock Rins live on for years and stuck 3 discs to it that flashed red silently and then green as if reporting to a supervisor. Down canyon, a CBP A-star hovered in a way that looked casual and was actually an engineer praying to math. "We're going to call this a dome collapse with hazardous underground gas," Mason said to the group as if I wasn't there. "ICS to reflect that. Wind out of the southeast." Nobody mentions the name. It behaves like a patient if you do not. We're going to give it back the lit it wanted. He looked at me long enough that I heard what he wasn't using words for. "You said the name, deputy. Don't say it again." "Where did it come from?" Hargrove asked. "I've been in this canyon in the rain and in a dust storm and under a blue sky, and that hole wasn't there. It was." Mason's smile didn't change, but the door was closed. "What opened it?" I asked. He glanced toward the coyote, who had pulled himself upright and was watching the canyon the way a child watches a parent decide whether to spank or not. "Hunger," Mason said, "and prayer, and chance, and the math we write down in ledgers you don't need to read." He clapped his hands once softly, not to command attention. Everyone was looking at him, but like a man warming himself. "We'll need your statement after. You can leave the part with names out." It did not become daytime. That's the first thing I'll say about the thing they brought. If you've stood too close when an EOD team puts a shape charge on a door, you know how a small sun can arrive with a temper and eat what you loved without looking at you. This wasn't that. The sky went a wrong color. The color tin turns when it's rubbed with a dark cloth. The air got a taste like burnt rosemary. Every radio clicked and then stopped pretending to be technology. Somewhere behind me, a BP agent finished his prayer the way a man who knows his prayer won't be answered finishes it anyway. Then, under the canyon floor, a door slammed hard enough to make your organs complain. We were far enough from the mouth that the bright that wasn't bright didn't peel our skin. The shock wasn't a wave, it was an edit. The canyon ended a foot closer together than it had been. A sheet of rock the size of the produce section at Safeway slumped into place over the lip we had walked under like a lid. A bird that had made its living this summer in a hole just to the left made one indignant chirp and flew to Mexico. The men in suits stood still for a long breath like gamblers watching a number spin. Then the woman who had put the discs on the wall looked at a screen and nodded once to Mason. He nodded once to the sky. The A-star lifted a hair and drifted north. The canyon remembered what it was like before we had come and had opinions about it. "Utilities," Hargrove said, flat, in a voice that could have broken a window if it were glass. "You have my gratitude," Mason said to nobody and to the canyon at once. Then he looked at us like we'd pass a test he hadn't planned to give. "You'll have a mop-up," he added, professional. "Media is easy out here. The story writes itself. Monsoon undermined a chamber, illegal pit cooking fire, collapse. Gas pockets. We'll help you with the words." Torres stared at him in a way I've seen men stare at cliffs. They were alive. They still are, Mason said gently. "In a way neither of us can help. We're preventing spread. That's what we do." He touched the side of his head, as if listening to a voice from a thin world. "Agents next of kin will be contacted on our side," he said. "You don't need to stand between that and families. We have a script that leaves room for grief." We stood a perimeter. We wrote reports with the parts we could make palatable. USBP wrote theirs with boxes ticked that satisfy a duty captain's need to brief a chief at 8 o'clock without changing the chief's breakfast plans. Fire staged in a way that looked like they were ready to fight a flare-up and instead fought the urge to stand there with their mouths open like fishermen. The sun came up half-hearted over the ridge and lit the Ocotillo tips red as if nothing had happened. I went home at 10 like a man who has to pretend he is a person with a house and did the shower where you stand there and let the water choose the next thing you do. I didn't sleep. When I closed my eyes, The room under the canyon breathed in, and I breathed with it. When I opened them, the little brass cross my mother insists on hanging in every house I live in looked like a piece of a fence in a place where it doesn't want to be a fence anymore. The official after came 2 days later. A meeting in a room at the substation they reserve for HR and people who want to fight their speeding tickets in person. A woman with the kind of haircut that says she's too busy to care and too precise not to care sat with Mason, and a third person whose badge said nothing and whose face said, "I sleep fine." They put papers on the table that used the words non-disclosure and national and continuity in ways that made me feel like a high school student being drafted by a team he didn't try out for. "We recruit from events," Mason said. He didn't pretend about it. "People who've stood in the room and didn't break or did and are willing to stand again anyway. We could use a deputy who knows how the Pelinsillos breathe." "What is it?" Hargrove asked. She hadn't come to be recruited. She'd come because there was no version of this where she didn't ask the question. "Call it what it is, at least to us." The woman with the haircut pushed a legal pad toward Hargrove. On the top page was a list of words in 2 columns. The left said, karst, kiva, lava tube, pipe cave, adit, stopes, cenote, fault. The right said, sleeper, door, mouth, breeder, lens, vent. She shrugged, almost smiling. "We argue about names. Names make things wake up, sometimes. It's not magic. It's compliance. You call a thing by its job, and it's more likely to do it. We try not to call them anything. We correct them. We put lids back. We keep counts. We keep roads. Counts. Lids." I felt something line up with the other nights I've had to write down in ways that don't make anyone angry in court later. I thought of a bridge where eyes shine like tape. I thought of a copper voice in a filing cabinet. I thought of an old kid tipping his hat with a 22 in his hand. Arizona carries a ledger. Men like me walk between the columns. What if I say no? I asked honest. "You won't," the third person said kindly. "But if you do, we will love you anyway. We will ask you to sign a paper that says you are not going to try to say the name of a thing out loud where microphones live." He pushed a form to me that had blanks for dates and looked like a tax document, got drunk, and took a job with a church. Hargrove didn't sign. I did. I don't know if I regret it yet, or if I regret not reading every word and pretending I understood them. Sometimes the only way forward is to let someone else call your signature a promise and walk under it. I wish the story ended with a clean break and something you could put in a training manual. It doesn't. The canyon stayed quiet for a month. Then a rancher who runs small black Angus with a brand that looks like a smile called and said his east tank wasn't right. The water had turned syrup thick overnight, and his daughter had put her hands in it because kids put their hands in anything that looks like a dare, and her fingers went numb for an hour and glowed faintly in their pink at the cuticle. I called Mason and said, "Tank," and he said, "We're on our way." And a truck with no plate slid into the yard at sundown, and a man in a hard hat with no logo smiled at the rancher's daughter and said, "We're going to make your water taste like jokes again." And I stood with my coffee and watched them mull a thing out of the truck that hummed like a chorus. 2 days later, the tank was clear, except the pipe that ran from it sweat blacked every third minute, and then took the dot back the way a tongue takes back a droplet on a lip. In November, a Borstar medic I know texted me from Nogales. Got a call about a drain at a produce warehouse that won't stay clear. Boss says stop asking questions. Utilities are here. In December, a miner up in Bisbee posted a picture to Facebook of a hand pointing at a rock face with a caption, "Old timers say don't tap the kiva," then took it down, then posted a photo of a sunset instead. And if you've lived here long enough, you can tell when a sunset is working as a bandage. You asked for truth. This is mine. I have not driven Skeleton Canyon since that night without turning the radio down and listening to hear if the canyon is breathing on rhythm. If the air turns cold without wind and your mouth tastes like a battery, and you hear the gym bat flapping scaled up to something you don't want to meet at a urinal, leave. If a coyote with a comma scar on his cheek says he opened a door, he did. Don't say the name with a capital letter where his kids sleep. If your Z-cans stop pinging all at once like polite children, don't congratulate yourself on the quiet. Back out until the canyon lets you count out loud again. I used to tell rookies the ordinary things. Carry more water than your pride demands. Never trust a wash in a storm. Watch the sky where the bats feed to tell you what the bugs are doing, and the bugs will tell you what the snakes are doing. I tell them new things now. If your compass tritium looks dim in a way physics doesn't account for, turn around. If your radio repeats your voice after you, and it sounds like it's coming from a hallway, stop saying nouns. If you see a room underground with sheet music lines rubbed into the rock, leave. That place is writing a score you don't get to conduct. The county wrote collapse and illegal fire and gas pockets in a document that will live longer than me. Families got flags and scripts. Men with haircuts that don't matter and smiles that do came and shook hands and told the truth they are chartered to tell, which is that nothing happened. I wear the badge still. I work nights because nights tell the truth faster. Some nights I hear breathing in the engine of my unit, and it's just air moving through the vents. Some nights I turn the knob and the air keeps breathing anyway, and I pull over and set both hands on the wheel and say my mother's version of the Lord's Prayer in Spanish, the one that keeps the parts about bread, and the night lets me drive again. They sent me a card in January with the word utilities on it in a font that wants to be your friend. On the back, in pen, one line. You said the name and it listened. I taped it to the inside of my locker where only I can be reminded of my own stupidity. I was never the bravest. I was the person who wrote the ledger clean. That's all this job is, under the uniforms and the ceremony. Numbers in and numbers out. Some nights the canyon wants some of our numbers for itself. You can't arrest a canyon. You can only close a door and promise not to say the word that turns the handle. If you hike down there looking for where Geronimo stood, good. Learn the stories the right way, from somebody who has a grandmother who says their name like a prayer and a person. Pack out your trash. Don't light fires and washes. Don't dig at the wall that looks inviting. The desert keeps what you leave with great efficiency, and sometimes it will make what you leave better and call it improved, and use that word so gentle you forget to be angry at it. If you feel cold without wind and your tongue tastes like a battery, and you catch the scent of salt where there should only be dust, turn around. If you don't, and you go anyway because some of you will, text your sister your plan, say a word without vowels in it, and try not to call anything by its name. I'm not here to be dramatic. I'm here because people vanish and I owe you the story I can tell without waking what we closed. This is a true account. I can show you a paper that says I saw nothing worth your time, and a different paper that says I'm now cleared to be called when somebody else says a word underground that wakes a person who hates being called. The canyon breathes. The county counts. We keep roads. If you walk skeleton at night and it breathes in, do not breathe in with it. Keep your own rhythm. Keep your own name. If you can't, I hope the lid holds. And if one night, under a sky with no wind, you hear a door close like a book slamming shut, don't clap. It wasn't a show. It was maintenance. I live in Douglas. My mother's cross still hangs beside the front door. When the monsoon blows in and the roof ticks like an old stove cooling, I get up and stand on my porch and smell creosote and the memory of ocean in a place that has no business with either. I say the names of the agents and the migrants I learned that night in order until the rhythm makes a kind of sentence I'm not licensed to translate. Then I go back inside, lay my badge on the counter like a coin, and sleep like a man who has agreed that some ledgers are not his to balance. If you're listening in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me where your roads go. And if you're ever east of 191 after midnight, and you feel the air get cold without wind, keep driving. Don't say the word. Some of us are awake to hold the lid.